Grizzly attacks family SUV, kills father. September 22, 2024. The morning of September 20th, 2024, dawned crisp and clear across the peaks of Glacier National Park, with temperatures hovering just above freezing as Dr. James Christopher Riley finished loading the last of their camping gear into the back of their silver Toyota 4Runner. The 43-year-old emergency room physician from Portland, Oregon, had been planning this family vacation for 8 months, meticulously researching trails, campgrounds, and safety protocols for what he hoped would be the perfect introduction to wilderness camping for his wife Sarah and their 2 children. 12-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Michael. Sarah Elizabeth Riley, 39, stood beside their vehicle, double-checking her carefully laminated emergency contact list, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that revealed the worry lines that had been etched deeper around her green eyes since her mother's cancer diagnosis 6 months earlier. As a registered nurse at Portland General Hospital, she understood the importance of preparation, but something about this trip felt different, more urgent somehow, as if this might be their last chance for a truly carefree family adventure before life became more complicated. Emma Riley, wise beyond her 12 years with her father's analytical mind and her mother's cautious nature, methodically checked and rechecked her hiking boots, adjusting the laces with the precision of someone who had inherited her parents' attention to detail. She had spent weeks researching Glacier National Park's wildlife, particularly fascinated by the grizzly bears that called these mountains home, never imagining that her careful study of bear behavior would soon become a matter of life and death. 9-year-old Michael James Riley bounced excitedly beside the SUV, his boundless energy barely contained as he clutched his new digital camera, a birthday present from his grandparents that he planned to use to document every moment of their adventure. His sandy brown hair caught the early morning sunlight as he peppered his parents with questions about the wildlife they might encounter, his innocent enthusiasm a stark contrast to the tragedy that would unfold just 48 hours later. The Riley family had chosen Glacier National Park specifically for its reputation as one of America's last truly wild places, where grizzly bears still roamed freely through pristine alpine meadows and dense forests of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. James had spent countless hours studying the park's safety guidelines, purchasing bear spray for each family member, and ensuring they understood proper food storage protocols. He had even attended a wilderness safety course at REI, where instructor Marcus Yellowbird, a member of the Blackfeet Nation whose ancestors had lived in these mountains for thousands of years, had emphasized the unpredictable nature of grizzly bear encounters. Remember, Marcus had told the class just 3 weeks earlier, his weathered face serious as he demonstrated proper bear spray technique. Grizzlies are not just large animals. They are apex predators with intelligence that rivals our own. They can run 35 miles per hour, climb trees better than most humans, and their strength is beyond comprehension. A single swipe from a grizzly's paw can decapitate a bull elk. These bears demand respect, not fear, but absolute respect. Dr. Riley had taken those words to heart, purchasing top-quality bear canisters for food storage and ensuring each family member carried an 8-ounce canister of counter-assault bear spray rated for grizzly encounters. He had reviewed proper hiking protocols with Emma and Michael, teaching them to make noise on trails, travel in tight groups, and never run from a bear encounter. The irony that all his careful preparation would prove useless in the face of an unprecedented vehicular attack would haunt the survivors for years to come. Their planned route would take them along the Going to the Sun Road, one of the most spectacular mountain drives in North America, winding 50 miles through the heart of Glacier National Park from West Glacier to St. Mary. The narrow, cliff-hugging road climbs through dense cedar and hemlock forests before emerging above tree line at Logan Pass, elevation 6,646 feet, where Arctic wildflowers bloom briefly in the short mountain summer and mountain goats pick their way across seemingly impossible cliff faces. Park Ranger Elena Vasquez had been monitoring grizzly activity in the Logan Pass area throughout the summer of 2024, noting unusual behavioral patterns among the local bear population. The 31-year-old wildlife biologist, who had transferred to Glacier from Yellowstone 2 years earlier, had documented 17 different grizzly bears frequenting the high alpine areas around Logan Pass, including a massive male designated Bear 471 by the park's wildlife management team. Bear 471, estimated at over 600 pounds and approximately 15 years old, had been exhibiting increasingly bold behavior throughout the summer, approaching vehicles and campgrounds with a confidence that worried park officials. Unlike most grizzlies, which typically avoid human contact, Bear 471 seemed curious about vehicles, often investigating parked cars at the Logan Pass Visitor Center parking area. On 3 separate occasions in August, the bear had been observed standing on his hind legs to peer through car windows, behavior that wildlife biologist Dr. Amanda Chen had noted as extremely unusual and potentially dangerous. Dr. Chen, a bear behavior specialist with the U.S. Geological Survey, who had been studying Glacier's grizzly population for 7 years, had recommended increased monitoring of Bear 471 after observing him testing car door handles with his claws on August 15th. Her detailed reports, filed with both the National Park Service and Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, described the bear as demonstrating problem behavior consistent with food conditioning, despite no evidence of successful food acquisition from vehicles. The morning of September 20th found Bear 471 in the dense whitebark pine forest approximately 2 miles east of Logan Pass, where he had been feeding on army cutworm moths that congregated on the rocky slopes during late summer. These high-protein insects provided essential calories for bears preparing for winter hibernation. But the 2024 moth migration had been significantly reduced due to an unusual late-season drought across the region. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a climatologist with the National Weather Service who had been tracking Glacier's weather patterns for over a decade, had documented the driest August in park history, with precipitation levels nearly 70% below normal. This drought had cascaded through the ecosystem, reducing berry production, limiting root vegetable growth, and disrupting the natural feeding patterns that sustained the park's grizzly population through the critical pre-hibernation period. The bears are stressed, Dr. Martinez had noted in her September 15th report to park officials. When natural food sources become scarce, we see increased bold behavior as bears search for alternative calories. The situation is particularly concerning given the approaching winter season. As the Riley family began their journey into the park that Friday morning, Bear 471 was approximately 8 miles from their planned route. But the complex territorial patterns of grizzly bears meant their paths were destined to intersect in ways no human could predict. Male grizzlies can have territories spanning over 300 square miles, and Bear 471's domain encompassed much of the high country between Logan Pass and the park's eastern boundary. The family's first day proceeded exactly as James had hoped, with perfect weather and spectacular scenery as they made their way along the Going to the Sun road. They stopped at Avalanche Creek for lunch, where the children delighted in the crystal-clear mountain water cascading over ancient red rocks, and Sarah captured dozens of photos of Emma and Michael exploring the moss-covered boulders with the careful supervision their father insisted upon. Trail guide and seasonal park employee Jennifer Blackhorse, who had been leading nature walks in Glacier for 6 summers, encountered the Riley family at the Trail of the Cedars boardwalk that afternoon. The 24-year-old environmental science graduate from the University of Montana would later remember James's careful attention to safety protocols as they discussed bear awareness strategies. The father was very thorough, Jennifer would tell investigators 3 days later, her voice still shaky from the news of the attack. He asked about recent bear sightings, proper noise-making techniques, and whether we'd had any incidents this season. He seemed like exactly the kind of visitor we hope to see, prepared, respectful, and genuinely interested in learning about the ecosystem. No, the family's planned campsite at Apgar Campground provided a peaceful first night, with James and Sarah staying up late around their carefully contained campfire, discussing their hopes for the children's connection to wilderness and their own dreams of visiting more national parks in the coming years. The conversation, preserved in Sarah's journal which survived the attack, revealed a couple deeply committed to creating lasting memories while instilling respect for nature in their children. James talks about wilderness as church, Sarah had written in her careful handwriting. I think I'm beginning to understand what he means. There's something here that makes the everyday worries seem smaller, more manageable. Emma seems more confident out here, more willing to take calculated risks, and Michael's energy feels more focused, less scattered. I can see why James wanted to share this with us. Saturday, September 21st, brought slightly warmer weather and the family's planned ascent to Logan Pass. The drive itself would take approximately 2 hours, winding through increasingly dramatic terrain as the road climbed from the dense forests of the valley floor to the alpine tundra above treeline. James had planned multiple stops along the way, including the Weeping Wall, where dozens of waterfalls cascade directly onto the road, and Bird Woman Falls, a spectacular 492-foot waterfall visible from several viewpoints along the route. Park Maintenance Supervisor Robert "Bob" Thunderhart had been monitoring road conditions since dawn, ensuring the narrow passage was safe for the hundreds of vehicles that would traverse it that day. The 57-year-old Blackfeet tribal member who had worked in Glacier for over 3 decades took particular pride in maintaining the road his grandfather had helped construct during the Civilian Conservation Corps era of the 1930s. The road demands respect, Bob often told new employees during orientation sessions. It was carved into these mountains by hand, with dynamite and determination. Every mile represents risk, and weather can change conditions in minutes. We never assume anything is routine up there. Bob's morning inspection had revealed normal conditions, clear skies, light winds, and no fresh rockfall or washouts. However, his weather radio was crackling with reports of an unexpected high-pressure system moving in from the west, bringing unusually warm temperatures that could destabilize snow and ice on the high peaks. The Riley family departed Apgar Campground at 8:45 a.m., with James driving and Sarah navigating using both GPS and traditional paper maps. The children were excited but contained in the back seat, each absorbed in their respective activities. Emma reading a field guide to Rocky Mountain wildlife, while Michael tested his camera's zoom capabilities on the towering peaks surrounding them. Their first stop came at McDonald Creek, where James wanted to show the children the engineering marvel of the road's construction. The massive stone arches and carefully fitted retaining walls demonstrated the incredible skill of the workers who had built this passage through seemingly impossible terrain. As James explained the construction process, pointing out drill marks still visible in the rock faces, none of them noticed the fresh grizzly tracks in the soft earth beside the parking area. Park wildlife technician David Kim had documented those tracks just 30 minutes before the Riley family's arrival, noting in his field journal that they belonged to an adult male grizzly based on the size and spacing of the paw prints. David, a recent graduate of Colorado State University's wildlife biology program, was completing his first season in Glacier as part of the park's ongoing grizzly monitoring project. Large male, probably 500 plus pounds, David had written, carefully photographing the tracks with a ruler for scale. Heading east, likely following the riparian corridor toward Logan Pass area. No signs of cubs or females in the vicinity. Bear appears to be moving with purpose, possibly responding to food stimulus. What David couldn't know was that Bear 471 had indeed detected food, not the natural army cutworm moths or whitebark pine nuts that typically drew grizzlies to high elevations, but the lingering scent of the Riley family's breakfast preparations from their campsite 12 miles away. The bear's incredible sense of smell, 7 times more sensitive than a bloodhound's, had locked onto the bacon grease that had accidentally splattered onto James's hiking boots during their morning meal preparation. The Riley family's ascent continued without incident through the spectacular Loop area, where the road makes a dramatic switchback turn, offering panoramic views of the Flathead Valley stretching endlessly to the west. Emma was fascinated by the geological explanations in her guidebook, particularly the descriptions of how glaciers had carved these valleys over hundreds of thousands of years. "Dad, how long did it take for the glaciers to make all this?" Emma asked, her scientific curiosity clearly inherited from her physician father. "Geological time is hard to comprehend," James replied, slowing the vehicle to navigate a particularly tight curve. "The last major glaciation ended about 10,000 years ago, but ice had been advancing and retreating through these valleys for much longer. What we're seeing represents millions of years of geological processes." Sarah captured this moment on her phone, recording the conversation between father and daughter against the backdrop of some of the most spectacular mountain scenery in North America. The video, recovered intact from her device after the attack, would later serve as heartbreaking evidence of the family's happiness and excitement, just hours before tragedy struck. As they approached the area known as the Big Drift, where snow can persist well into July some years, Michael spotted a mountain goat picking its way across a nearly vertical cliff face. The sighting prompted a discussion of animal adaptations to extreme environments, with James explaining how mountain goats' specialized hooves and low center of gravity allow them to navigate terrain that would be impossible for other large mammals. "What about bears?" Michael asked innocently. "Could a bear climb on those rocks?" "Grizzly bears are incredibly strong climbers," James explained, unknowingly providing information that would prove prophetic. "They can climb trees, scramble up rocky slopes, and navigate terrain that looks impossible for such large animals. That's part of what makes them so successful as predators." The conversation was interrupted by their arrival at the Weeping Wall, where dozens of seasonal waterfalls created a spectacular display of cascading water that often reaches directly across the road. James pulled into one of the designated viewing areas, and the family spent 20 minutes photographing the natural phenomenon and enjoying the cool mist that provided relief from the unexpectedly warm September sunshine. Park interpreter Jessica Whitehorse was conducting a scheduled nature talk for a group of visitors when the Riley family arrived at the Weeping Wall. The 35-year-old park ranger, who specialized in the cultural history of the glacier region, noticed the family's careful attention to safety protocols and their genuine enthusiasm for learning about the park's natural systems. They asked intelligent questions about the water sources for these falls, Jessica would later recall. The father was particularly interested in the hydrological cycle and how snowmelt timing affects the volume of water. The mother was taking extensive notes, and both children were clearly engaged and excited. They seemed like the perfect park visitors. As the Riley family continued their ascent toward Logan Pass, Bear 471 was approximately 4 miles away, moving steadily eastward along a game trail that paralleled the Going to the Sun Road at a higher elevation. The bear had been following the scent trail that had first attracted his attention near McDonald Creek, his powerful nose guiding him toward what his brain interpreted as a potential food source. Dr. Chen's research had documented that male grizzlies like Bear 471 could follow scent trails for distances exceeding 20 miles, particularly when food sources were scarce. The bear's behavior was being driven by powerful biological imperatives. With winter approaching and natural food sources limited by the drought, every calorie became critically important for survival. Weather observer Nancy Redstone, stationed at the Logan Pass Visitor Center, was noting the unusually warm conditions in her hourly report. Temperatures had reached 72 degrees Fahrenheit at the 6,646-foot elevation, nearly 15 degrees above normal for late September. The warm weather was creating unstable conditions in the high alpine environment, with increased rockfall risk and unusual animal movement patterns. Bears are typically less active during warm afternoons, Nancy had noted in her 11 a.m. weather summary. However, the current temperature anomaly may be disrupting normal behavioral patterns. Wildlife observers should be particularly alert for unusual animal activity. The Riley family reached Logan Pass at approximately 11:30 a.m., joining dozens of other visitors in the busy parking area that serves as the starting point for several popular hiking trails. The Hidden Lake Overlook Trail, a 1.5-mile boardwalk hike to a spectacular viewpoint, was their planned afternoon activity. James had specifically chosen this trail because it was well-maintained, clearly marked, and considered one of the safer options for families with children. Logan Pass represents the Continental Divide, where water flowing west eventually reaches the Pacific Ocean, while water flowing east makes its way to the Atlantic via the Missouri and Mississippi river systems. The symbolic significance of standing on this divide was not lost on the Riley family, who took dozens of photos at the official marker while other visitors offered to capture family portraits. Visitor Center naturalist Dr. Thomas Bear Grease, a member of the Little Shell tribe who had been interpreting glaciers' natural and cultural history for 8 years, encountered the Riley family during their visit to the Logan Pass Visitor Center. The interaction, captured on the center's security cameras, showed a family clearly enjoying their wilderness experience while following all recommended safety protocols. The father purchased additional bear spray and asked detailed questions about proper storage techniques, Dr. Bear Grease would later testify. He wanted to understand the effective range, wind considerations, and whether the spray could be used from inside a vehicle if necessary. It was exactly the kind of preparation we hope to see from park visitors. The Hidden Lake Overlook Trail proved to be everything the Riley family had hoped for, with spectacular views, abundant wildflowers despite the late season, and opportunities to observe mountain goats, pikas, and marmots in their natural habitat. Emma's wildlife knowledge impressed other hikers, while Michael's enthusiasm for photography led to conversations with several serious landscape photographers who offered tips for capturing the dramatic mountain light. The family spent 2 hours on the trail, reaching the overlook at approximately 1:45 p.m. and enjoying lunch at the scenic viewpoint while watching golden eagles soar through the mountain thermals below. Sarah's journal entry from that afternoon captured the perfection of the moment. This is exactly what James envisioned when he planned this trip. The children are confident and curious, the weather is perfect, and the scenery is beyond description. I feel like we're sharing something sacred. As the Riley family enjoyed their lunch at Hidden Lake Overlook, Bear 471 had reached a position approximately 1 mile from Logan Pass, moving through dense whitebark pine forest that provided cover while he continued following the scent trail that had drawn him across miles of mountainous terrain. The bear's movement was being tracked unknowingly by park wildlife technician David Kim, who was conducting his weekly grizzly monitoring survey using radio telemetry equipment. "I'm picking up a strong signal from Bear 471, David radioed to the park's wildlife management office at 2:15 p.m. He's moving eastward toward the Logan Pass area at an unusually fast pace. His movement pattern suggests he's following a specific scent trail rather than randomly foraging. Wildlife Management Supervisor Rachel Stronghart received David's radio call while reviewing incident reports in her West Glacier office. The 44-year-old wildlife biologist had been monitoring Bear 471's increasingly bold behavior throughout the summer and was particularly concerned about his apparent interest in vehicles and human-associated scents. "Keep monitoring his movement," Rachel instructed David. "If he approaches within 1 mile of Logan Pass or any developed areas, we may need to implement hazing protocols. His behavior pattern this summer suggests he's losing his natural fear of humans." The hazing protocols Rachel referenced were non-lethal techniques designed to reinforce Bear's natural wariness of humans, including the use of loud noises, rubber bullets, and bear spray to create negative associations with human presence. However, these techniques required wildlife personnel to be in position before the bear reached areas where public encounters were likely. The Riley family began their descent from Hidden Lake Overlook at approximately 2:30 p.m., planning to return to Logan Pass and then continue their drive along the Going to the Sun Road towards St. Mary. Their timing, which seemed perfect given the afternoon light for photography, would ultimately prove tragically coincidental with Bear 471's approach to the area. As they walked back along the boardwalk trail, James pointed out various plant species to Emma and Michael, using the knowledge he had gained from his extensive pre-trip research. The mountain ash trees were displaying their spectacular autumn colors, with bright red berries that provided crucial food for various wildlife species. What James didn't know was that the drought conditions had significantly reduced the berry production that normally sustained bears during their pre-hibernation feeding period. "The ecosystem connections are incredible up here," James explained to his children as they paused to examine a particularly large mountain ash. "Everything is interconnected: the soil, the plants, the animals, the weather patterns. When one element changes, it affects everything else." His words were more prophetic than he could have imagined. The drought that had reduced natural food sources was indeed affecting everything else, driving Bear 471 toward an unprecedented encounter with humans that would challenge every assumption about grizzly bear behavior. The family reached Logan Pass parking area at 3:05 p.m., where they took additional photos and used the visitor center restrooms before beginning their descent towards St. Mary. The parking area was busy with tourists from around the world, creating a festive atmosphere that masked the approaching danger none of them could have anticipated. Park maintenance worker Carlos Mendoza was clearing trash from the parking area when he noticed unusually fresh bear sign near the entrance to the Hidden Lake Trail. The scratches on a wooden signpost were clearly made by large claws, and the scent marking indicated a mature male grizzly had been investigating the area within the past hour. "I should have reported it immediately," Carlos would later tell investigators, his voice heavy with guilt. "But bear sign around Logan Pass is common, and I didn't think much of it at the time. If I had called it in, maybe they could have closed the area, or at least warned people." The Riley family's Toyota 4Runner pulled out of the Logan Pass parking area at 3:20 p.m., beginning the spectacular descent along the eastern section of the Going to the Sun Road. This portion of the route offers some of the most dramatic mountain scenery in North America, with sheer cliff faces rising thousands of feet on one side and equally dramatic drop-offs on the other. James was driving carefully, maintaining safe speeds on the narrow road while pointing out geological features and wildlife habitat to his family. The afternoon light was creating perfect conditions for photography, and Sarah was capturing dozens of images through the passenger window, while Emma and Michael pressed against the rear windows to maximize their viewing opportunities. "This is incredible," Sarah said, lowering her camera momentarily to take in the vast landscape spreading out before them. "I understand now why you've been wanting to bring us here for so long. It's like seeing the earth the way it was meant to be." Their conversation was relaxed and happy, filled with plans for their remaining day in the park and discussions of other wilderness areas they might explore in future family trips. The audio recording from Sarah's phone, which had been running to capture their commentary for later review, documented a family completely absorbed in the beauty of their surroundings and the joy of shared discovery. At 3:35 p.m., as the Riley family navigated a series of tight switchbacks approximately 2 miles east of Logan Pass, Bear 471 emerged from the dense forest cover onto a section of road roughly 300 yards ahead of their position. The bear had been following the scent trail that originated from James's contaminated hiking boots, and the concentration of the smell indicated he was very close to its source. David Kim, still tracking the bear's radio collar signal, watched his telemetry equipment with growing concern as Bear 471's movement pattern changed from purposeful travel to stationary positioning near the road corridor. "He's stopped moving," David radioed to dispatch. "The signal indicates he's within 100 meters of the Going to the Sun Road, approximately 2 miles east of Logan Pass." The dispatch operator, seasonal employee Maria Santos, was handling multiple radio calls as the busy Saturday afternoon created various minor incidents throughout the park. David's report about Bear 471's position was logged but not immediately forwarded to road patrol units, a communication delay that would later be identified as a critical factor in the timeline of events. Bear 471 stood on the road for several minutes, his massive head swinging back and forth as he tested the air currents for the source of the scent that had drawn him across miles of difficult terrain. At over 600 pounds and standing nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, the bear represented the apex of North American predatory evolution, with strength, speed, and intelligence that few other species could match. The grizzly's behavioral patterns, developed over millions of years of evolution, were focused on one primary objective during late September: accumulating the fat reserves necessary to survive the coming winter hibernation. Every decision the bear made was filtered through this biological imperative, creating a level of motivation that could override normal wariness of humans and vehicles. As the Riley family's SUV approached the curve where Bear 471 waited, none of them were aware that they were about to become part of an unprecedented wildlife encounter that would challenge everything experts thought they knew about grizzly bear behavior. The next few minutes would transform their family vacation into a tragedy that would haunt the survivors forever and change wildlife management protocols throughout North America. James first spotted the grizzly bear at 3:41 p.m. as he navigated around a tight left-hand curve, the massive animal standing motionless in the center of the narrow road approximately 75 yards ahead. His immediate response was exactly what park safety protocols recommended. He gradually reduced speed while speaking calmly to alert his family to the presence of wildlife. "Everyone stay calm," James said quietly, his medical training helping him maintain composure in the face of potential danger. "There's a grizzly bear on the road ahead. We're going to stop the vehicle and wait for him to move along." Sarah immediately reached for her camera, while simultaneously locating the bear spray canister in the door pocket beside her seat. Her nursing background had taught her to prepare for multiple scenarios simultaneously, and she wanted to document the encounter while ensuring the family's safety equipment remained accessible, Emma and Michael pressed against the rear windows, their excitement temporarily overriding any sense of danger as they observed their first wild grizzly bear. The massive animal was even more impressive than the photographs in Emma's field guides, with thick brown fur that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon sunlight and a distinctive shoulder hump that marked him as a mature male. "He's huge," Michael whispered, his voice filled with awe rather than fear. "Is he looking at us?" Bear 471 was indeed looking at them, his small, dark eyes focused intently on the Toyota 4Runner as it came to a complete stop approximately 50 yards away. The bear's posture showed no immediate signs of aggression. His ears were forward in an alert position rather than laid back defensively, and his massive head was held high as he continued to process scent information. James kept the engine running while shifting into reverse, following standard protocols for wildlife encounters on narrow mountain roads. The plan was simple: maintain distance while giving the bear ample opportunity to leave the road corridor and continue with his natural behavior patterns. What no one in the vehicle could understand was that they were the natural behavior pattern Bear 471 was pursuing. For nearly 3 minutes, the standoff continued peacefully. The bear remained stationary in the roadway while the Riley family waited patiently in their vehicle, occasionally speaking in hushed tones about the incredible opportunity to observe a wild grizzly at such close range. Sarah managed to capture several photographs through the windshield, documenting what they all assumed would become a treasured family memory. The first sign that something was wrong came when Bear 471 began moving toward their vehicle instead of away from it. The bear's gait was purposeful and confident, without the typical wariness that characterizes most grisly encounters with humans. James immediately began backing the SUV away from the approaching bear, but the narrow road and steep terrain severely limited his maneuvering options. "Why is he coming toward us?" Sarah asked, her voice remaining calm despite the obviously unusual nature of the bear's behavior. "I thought they were supposed to avoid vehicles." "They usually do," James replied, continuing to reverse slowly while keeping the bear in sight. "He might be protecting cubs or defending a food source. We need to give him more space." The mention of cubs prompted Emma to scan the area around the bear for signs of offspring, but Bear 471 was clearly alone. Her extensive reading about grizzly behavior had taught her that solitary adult males were generally less predictable than females with cubs, who followed more defensive patterns that humans could anticipate and avoid. Bear 471 continued his approach, closing the distance to approximately 30 yards before stopping again and standing on his hind legs to get a better view of the vehicle and its occupants. The behavior, while spectacular for wildlife viewing, represented a significant escalation in the bear's interest level that should have triggered additional safety responses. "Everyone check your bear spray," James instructed, his voice still calm but with an undertone of growing concern. "Make sure you know how to use it if necessary, but remember that we're probably safer inside the vehicle than outside." The irony of that statement would become apparent within minutes, as the Toyota 4Runner's solid construction and safety features would prove no match for the incredible strength and determination of a motivated grizzly bear. The vehicle that represented safety and protection for the Riley family was about to become a trap that none of them could escape. David Kim's radio crackled to life at 3:45 p.m. with an urgent transmission from a park visitor who had observed the bear vehicle encounter from a hiking trail approximately 400 yards away. "There's a grizzly bear approaching a family in an SUV on the Going to the Sun Road," reported Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a wildlife photographer from Seattle who had been documenting mountain goats when she noticed the unfolding situation below. "Can you provide a more specific location?" David responded, already moving toward his own vehicle to respond to the potential incident. "Approximately 2 miles east of Logan Pass. Just past the tight switchbacks, Dr. Walsh replied. The bear is standing upright next to the vehicle now. This doesn't look like normal bear behavior. David's immediate radio call to Park Dispatch finally triggered the emergency response protocols that should have been activated earlier when Bear 471's unusual movement patterns were first detected. However, the closest law enforcement rangers were at least 15 minutes away from the remote location, and park policy prohibited civilian personnel from intervening in active wildlife encounters without proper backup. Bear 471 dropped back to all four legs and resumed his approach toward the Riley family's SUV, his massive paws making no sound on the asphalt as he closed the remaining distance. The bear's movement was deliberate and focused, showing none of the random or exploratory behavior typical of curious wildlife. This was a predator homing in on a specific target. James continued backing the vehicle away from the approaching bear, but the road's engineering created an impossible situation. The narrow pavement was bounded by a steep rock wall on the uphill side and a precipitous drop-off on the other, leaving no room for evasive maneuvers. The switchback design that made the road an engineering marvel also made it a potential trap for anyone caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I'm going to try to turn around at the next wide spot," James announced, his emergency room experience helping him maintain logical thinking despite the stress of the situation. "Everyone stay calm and keep your seatbelts fastened." The next wide spot in the road was approximately 200 yards behind their current position, requiring James to continue backing up while keeping the approaching bear in sight. The maneuver demanded complete concentration, leaving him unable to monitor the bear's behavior as closely as the situation warranted. Sarah took over bear-watching duties, providing a running commentary on the animal's movements, while James focused on safely navigating the narrow road in reverse. "He's still coming toward us, maybe 20 yards away now. His head is down, and he seems very focused on our vehicle." The description matched behavioral patterns that Dr. Chen had documented in her research on food-conditioned bears, where animals develop specific associations between vehicles and potential food sources. However, Bear 471 had never successfully obtained food from a vehicle, making his current behavior particularly puzzling and dangerous. Emma had stopped taking photographs and was instead consulting her field guide for information about defensive grizzly behavior. Her research had taught her that bears typically avoided confrontations with humans unless they felt threatened or were protecting resources, but nothing in her reading explained why a bear would persistently approach a vehicle containing obviously alert humans. "The book says bears usually bluff charge and then retreat," Emma told her family, her voice steady despite her growing concern. "But this doesn't look like a bluff charge. He's just walking straight toward us." Michael had become quiet, his earlier excitement replaced by an intuitive understanding that something was very wrong with the situation they were experiencing. His 9-year-old brain couldn't process the technical aspects of bear behavior, but his animal instincts recognized the purposeful nature of the grizzly's approach. At 3:47 p.m., Bear 471 reached the rear of the Toyota 4Runner, which James had been forced to stop due to a sharp curve in the road that made further backing impossible. The bear walked around the vehicle slowly, his nose working constantly as he investigated the source of the scent that had drawn him across miles of difficult terrain. "He's right next to us now," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as the massive predator passed just inches from her passenger window. "I can see every detail of his fur. He's absolutely incredible." The bear's investigation focused primarily on the driver's side of the vehicle, where the scent concentration was strongest due to James's contaminated hiking boots. Bear 471 stood on his hind legs again, this time placing his front paws against the driver's door while peering directly through the window at the vehicle's terrified occupants. James found himself making direct eye contact with the grizzly bear through the thin barrier of automotive glass, an experience that would haunt his nightmares for months afterward. The bear's eyes showed intelligence and determination rather than the wild unpredictability he had expected from a dangerous wildlife encounter. "Everyone remain absolutely still," James instructed in a barely audible whisper. "Don't make any sudden movements or loud noises. We need to avoid triggering a defensive response." The family sat frozen in their seats as Bear 471 continued his examination of the vehicle, his powerful claws leaving scratches in the paint as he explored the door handles and window frames. The bear's behavior suggested he was trying to solve a puzzle, how to access the source of the scent that had motivated him to travel so far from his normal territory. Dr. Walsh, still observing from her elevated position on the hiking trail, continued providing updates to park officials via her cell phone. "The bear is standing against the driver's side of the vehicle now. He appears to be trying to open the door. This is definitely not normal bear behavior." Park dispatcher Maria Santos was now coordinating responses from multiple agencies as the severity of the situation became apparent. Law enforcement rangers, wildlife management personnel, and emergency medical services were all being mobilized, but the remote location and narrow road access meant that help was still at least 10 minutes away. Bear 471's investigation of the vehicle became more aggressive as his attempts to locate the scent source proved unsuccessful. The bear began using his claws to test the strength of the window glass, creating spiderweb patterns that compromised the structural integrity without immediately breaking through. "The window is cracking," Sarah observed, her nursing training helping her maintain clinical observation skills despite her terror. "We need to prepare for the possibility that he might break through." James was mentally reviewing their options, none of which offered much hope for a positive outcome. The bear spray would be ineffective inside the confined space of the vehicle, and opening doors or windows to deploy it would only provide the bear with easier access to the interior. Their best hope remained that the bear would lose interest and move away before the windows failed completely. Emma had located the emergency roadside kit in the back of the SUV, including road flares that might be used to frighten the bear if the situation became desperate. Her systematic thinking reflected her father's influence, even in the face of mortal danger. "Dad, what about the horn?" Michael suggested, his voice small but determined. "Maybe loud noises will scare him away." "Good thinking," James replied. "But sudden loud noises can also trigger aggressive responses in bears. We need to be very careful about what actions we take." The decision was made for them when Bear 471's claws finally penetrated the driver's side window, sending a shower of safety glass fragments into the vehicle's interior. The bear's massive paw reached through the opening, searching for the scent source, while the family screamed in terror. James immediately activated the vehicle's horn and emergency flashes, while simultaneously attempting to start the engine and drive away from the attacking bear. However, Bear 471's paw had become entangled in the window mechanism, creating a connection between the vehicle and the bear that made escape impossible. Sarah deployed her bear spray through the broken window, creating a cloud of capsaicin-laden mist that should have driven the bear away from the vehicle. Instead, the confined space meant that the chemical deterrent affected the human occupants as much as the bear, creating a situation where everyone was effectively blinded and choking. The bear's response to the pepper spray was immediate and violent. Rather than retreating, Bear 471 became enraged by the chemical assault and began attacking the vehicle with unprecedented fury. His powerful claws and jaws began systematically destroying the SUV's exterior while the family huddled inside, unable to see or breathe effectively due to the bear spray contamination. "We have to get out!" James shouted over the sound of crushing metal and breaking glass. "The vehicle isn't going to protect us much longer." Emma grabbed the emergency road flares while Sarah gathered Michael into her arms, preparing for what seemed like an inevitable evacuation into the open, where they would be completely vulnerable to the raging grizzly. The carefully planned family vacation had become a nightmare of survival against one of North America's most formidable predators. The sound of approaching vehicles on the narrow mountain road provided a glimmer of hope as other park visitors became aware of the emergency situation. However, the narrow road design meant that potential rescuers would have to approach on foot, leaving their own vehicles behind and exposing themselves to danger from the enraged bear. Park Ranger Mike Thunderheart, Bob's nephew, who had been responding to David Kim's radio calls, arrived at a position approximately 200 yards from the attack scene at 3:52 p.m. The 28-year-old law enforcement ranger immediately assessed the situation and called for additional backup while preparing his own bear spray and emergency equipment. "I have visual on the incident," Mike radioed to dispatch. "Large male grizzly is actively attacking a family vehicle. The bear appears to be trying to gain access to the interior where multiple civilians are trapped, requesting immediate backup and medical support." The sight that greeted Ranger Thunderheart was unlike anything in his 5 years of law enforcement experience in Glacier National Park. Bear 471 had managed to create multiple breaches in the Toyota 4Runner's safety systems, with broken windows, dented doors, and torn metal creating gaps that allowed the bear partial access to the vehicle's interior. James Riley was bleeding from multiple lacerations caused by flying glass and metal fragments, but he continued trying to start the damaged vehicle while protecting his family from the bear's increasingly successful attempts to reach them. The SUV's engine had been damaged by the bear's assault, leaving them trapped without mobility in a vehicle that was rapidly being destroyed around them. Sarah had pulled both children into the rear of the vehicle, as far from the bear's primary attack points as possible, but the confined space offered little real protection as Bear 471 continued to enlarge the openings he had created. Her medical training told her that they needed immediate evacuation and emergency care, but the presence of the enraged bear made rescue impossible. "I'm going to try to distract the bear," Ranger Thunderheart radioed to his backup. "Civilians are in immediate mortal danger and can't wait for additional support to arrive." Mike's decision to intervene alone violated standard park protocols for dangerous wildlife encounters, but the rapidly deteriorating situation left no alternatives. He approached to within 30 yards of the attack scene and deployed his bear spray in a wide pattern designed to create a barrier between Bear 471 and the damaged vehicle. The second dose of chemical deterrent had a more pronounced effect on the bear, who temporarily retreated from the vehicle while shaking his massive head to clear the irritating spray from his eyes and nose. However, instead of fleeing the area as expected, Bear 471 turned his attention toward the new threat represented by Ranger Thunderheart. "The bear is moving toward my position," Mike reported, his voice steady despite the obvious danger of his situation. "Families should attempt evacuation toward the road while the bear is distracted." James immediately recognized the opportunity that Ranger Thunderheart's intervention had created. But the family's condition made rapid movement difficult. The bear spray contamination had left everyone with severely irritated eyes and respiratory systems, while flying glass had created multiple lacerations that limited their mobility. "Can everyone move?" James asked his family, already knowing that Michael's obvious shock and Emma's protective positioning around her younger brother would make rapid evacuation challenging. "I've got Michael," Sarah confirmed, lifting her 9-year-old son despite her own injuries and disorientation. "Emma, stay close to your father and follow our lead." The family's evacuation from the destroyed SUV took approximately 90 seconds, during which Ranger Thunderheart continued to maintain the bear's attention through strategic use of noisemakers and positioning. However, Bear 471's intelligence became apparent as he seemed to understand the connection between the humans and the vehicle that had been his primary focus. As soon as the Riley family emerged from their vehicle, the bear abandoned his confrontation with Ranger Thunderheart and charged directly toward them with a speed that shocked everyone present. Grizzly bears can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour over short distances, covering ground faster than any human can run, especially humans already injured and disoriented. James pushed Emma behind him while Sarah attempted to shield Michael with her own body, but the bear's charge was too fast and direct for any evasive action to be effective. Bear 471 struck James with his right paw, a blow that contained enough force to break ribs and send the 180-pound physician flying more than 10 feet before he struck the rocky road surface. The attack on James was swift and devastating, with Bear 471's claws and teeth inflicting massive trauma to the victim's chest and abdomen before anyone could intervene. Ranger Thunderheart's attempts to drive the bear away with additional bear spray proved ineffective at close range, and the narrow road provided no escape routes for the family members. Sarah's screams echoed off the surrounding mountain walls as she witnessed her husband's mauling, but her nurse's training forced her to maintain enough composure to continue protecting Michael while calling for Emma to run toward Ranger Thunderheart's position. The chaos of the moment made coordinated action nearly impossible, with everyone reacting instinctively to the immediate threats. Emma Riley, despite her terror, remembered her father's teachings about bear encounters and forced herself to remain still rather than running when Bear 471 briefly turned his attention toward her after completing his initial attack on James. Her decision to freeze rather than flee may have saved her life, as the bear's predatory instincts were focused on moving targets. Ranger Thunderheart advanced toward the bear, while deploying every noise-making device he carried, creating a cacophony of sound that finally succeeded in driving Bear 471 away from the immediate attack scene. However, the bear retreated only to the edge of the forest, remaining visible and clearly agitated as he continued to monitor the humans who had been his focus for over 10 minutes. The first priority was providing emergency medical care to James Riley, whose injuries were immediately recognized as life-threatening by both his wife and Ranger Thunderheart. The chest and abdominal trauma required immediate intervention that exceeded the capabilities of wilderness first aid, meaning that rapid evacuation to advanced medical facilities was essential for survival. "I need helicopter evacuation immediately," Ranger Thunderheart radioed to dispatch, while Sarah began applying direct pressure to her husband's most severe bleeding. "We have a critical grizzly mauling victim who needs trauma surgery within the hour to have any chance of survival." The request for helicopter evacuation created additional complications due to the narrow road corridor and surrounding terrain, which offered few suitable landing zones for medical aircraft. The nearest helicopter pad was at the Logan Pass Visitor Center, requiring ground transport of the critically injured victim across 2 miles of mountain road. Dr. Walsh, who had been observing the entire encounter from her elevated position, began making her way down to the road to provide additional medical assistance. Her background as a physician, combined with her wilderness medical training, made her uniquely qualified to help stabilize James until professional emergency services could arrive. Sarah's assessment of her husband's condition was devastating. The bear's claws had created deep lacerations across his chest that were bleeding profusely, while obvious signs of internal injury suggested damage to vital organs that required immediate surgical intervention. Her medical training told her that James had minutes rather than hours to live without proper trauma care. "Emma, I need you to help me," Sarah called to her daughter, forcing her voice to remain calm despite her terror and desperation. Your father needs us to stop this bleeding until help arrives." Emma's response demonstrated remarkable courage for a 12-year-old, as she overcame her shock and fear to assist her mother in providing life-saving first aid to her critically injured father. Her steady hands and quick thinking reflected the influence of two medical professionals who had taught her the importance of remaining calm during emergencies. Michael remained in shock, unable to process the violence he had witnessed and the transformation of their family vacation into a life-or-death struggle. Sarah made the difficult decision to focus her attention on James's medical needs, while trusting that Emma could provide emotional support for her younger brother. Additional park visitors began arriving at the scene as word of the emergency spread via radio and cell phone communications. However, the continued presence of Bear 471 at the forest edge made it dangerous for civilians to approach, creating a perimeter that limited the number of people who could assist with rescue efforts. Park wildlife biologist Dr. Chen arrived at 4:15 p.m., approximately 30 minutes after the initial attack, bringing specialized equipment for managing dangerous wildlife situations. Her immediate assessment was that Bear 471's behavior had crossed the threshold from normal grizzly encounter to what wildlife managers classified as a problem bear, requiring immediate intervention. "This bear has lost his natural fear of humans, Doctor," Chen explained to Ranger Thunderheart while observing Bear 471's continued presence near the attack scene. His persistent interest in the victims and refusal to leave the area suggests food conditioning or territorial behavior that makes him extremely dangerous to public safety. The decision to authorize lethal force against Bear 471 was made by Park Superintendent Rebecca Morrison at 4:22 p.m. after consultation with wildlife management specialists and law enforcement personnel. The bear's unprecedented aggressive behavior toward humans, combined with the immediate threat to public safety, met the criteria for emergency wildlife removal. However, implementing lethal force proved challenging due to the bear's position and the presence of civilians in the potential line of fire. Dr. Chen and Ranger Thunderheart had to coordinate their approach carefully to ensure that Bear 471 could be safely neutralized without creating additional risks for the rescue operation. The helicopter evacuation of James Riley was finally authorized at 4:35 p.m., with the aircraft landing at Logan Pass Visitor Center, where emergency medical technicians were standing by with advanced life support equipment. However, the 2-mile ground transport from the attack scene to the landing zone required carefully coordinated protection from the still-present bear. Sarah made the agonizing decision to remain with James during the evacuation process, while allowing Emma and Michael to be transported separately by ground vehicles to ensure their immediate safety. The family's separation during the most critical moments of the emergency added emotional trauma to an already devastating situation. James Riley was pronounced dead at 5:47 p.m. at Kalispell Regional Medical Center, approximately 2 hours after the initial bear attack. The trauma surgeon's report indicated that the bear's claws had severed major blood vessels in his chest cavity, creating internal bleeding that could not be controlled despite aggressive medical intervention. Bear 471 was killed by park wildlife officials at 6:15 p.m., approximately 2.5 hours after the attack began. The necropsy revealed a healthy adult male grizzly, showing no signs of disease or abnormal condition that might explain his unprecedented aggressive behavior toward humans. The investigation that followed would reveal that the bear attack on the Riley family represented a completely new type of human-wildlife conflict, challenging established protocols for bear management and public safety in national parks. The incident would lead to significant changes in wildlife monitoring procedures and visitor safety education throughout North American bear habitat. Sarah Riley and her 2 children were treated for their physical injuries at Kalispell Regional Medical Center and released the following day, but their psychological trauma from witnessing James's death would require years of counseling and support. The family's wilderness vacation had become a tragedy that would affect them for the rest of their lives. The media coverage of the attack began within hours of the incident, with news crews descending on Glacier National Park to report on what was being called an unprecedented grizzly bear attack. The story captured national attention due to the unusual nature of the bear's behavior and the tragic death of a respected emergency room physician. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's eyewitness account provided crucial details for investigators trying to understand Bear 471's motivation and behavior during the attack. Her photographs and video documentation of the incident became key evidence in the comprehensive review of park wildlife management policies that followed. The cleanup of the attack scene revealed the extent of damage that a single grizzly bear could inflict on a modern vehicle designed to protect its occupants from automotive accidents. The Toyota 4Runner was declared a total loss, with structural damage that made it unsuitable for repair or safe operation. Park Ranger Mike Thunderheart was commended for his courage in intervening during the attack, potentially saving the lives of Sarah, Emma, and Michael Riley through his willingness to put himself at risk. However, he also struggled with guilt over his inability to prevent James's death despite his best efforts. The psychological impact on the park staff was significant, with several employees requiring counseling and support after witnessing or responding to the unprecedented violence of the attack. The incident challenged everyone's assumptions about the relative safety of working in grizzly bear habitat. Wildlife technician David Kim's radio tracking data became crucial evidence in understanding Bear 471's movement patterns leading up to the attack. The information revealed that the bear had traveled over 20 miles following the scent trail that ultimately led to the encounter with the Riley family. The drought conditions that had reduced natural food sources throughout Glacier National Park were identified as a contributing factor to Bear 471's unusual behavior, though they could not fully explain why this particular bear chose to attack a vehicle rather than simply searching for alternative food sources. Dr. Chen's research data on Bear 471's previous behavior around vehicles proved prophetic, as her warnings about the bear's food conditioning had been documented months before the fatal attack. The incident highlighted the challenges of managing individual problem animals in a park system that prioritized wildlife conservation. The Riley family's campsite at Apgar Campground was investigated for evidence of food storage violations or other factors that might have attracted Bear 471's attention. However, the investigation revealed that the family had followed all park regulations and safety protocols throughout their visit. The bacon grease on James's hiking boots was ultimately identified as the most likely scent source that had attracted Bear 471's attention, demonstrating how even minor oversights in wilderness hygiene could have catastrophic consequences in bear habitat. The legal implications of the attack were complicated by questions about park management's responsibility for monitoring known problem animals and warning visitors about potential dangers. Several lawsuits were filed against the National Park Service, though most were eventually settled out of court. The incident report filed by park officials exceeded 400 pages, documenting every aspect of the attack and response in unprecedented detail. The report became a reference document for wildlife managers throughout North America dealing with human-bear conflicts. Memorial services for Dr. James Riley were held both in Portland, Oregon, and at Glacier National Park, reflecting his love for wilderness areas and his dedication to sharing that passion with his family. The park memorial included the planting of a grove of native trees near Lake McDonald, creating a living tribute to his memory. The Riley family's recovery process was complicated by extensive media attention that made it difficult for Sarah, Emma, and Michael to process their grief privately. The transition from family vacation to international news story added additional stress to an already traumatic situation. Counseling services were provided to all park visitors who witnessed aspects of the attack or its aftermath. Recognizing that exposure to such violence could have lasting psychological effects on people who had come to the park seeking peaceful recreation in nature. The investigation's final report was released 6 months after the attack, concluding that Bear 471's behavior represented an unprecedented departure from normal grizzly patterns that could not have been predicted based on existing scientific knowledge of bear behavior. Changes to park protocols included enhanced monitoring of individual bears showing any interest in vehicles, improved communication systems for wildlife sightings, and revised visitor education programs emphasizing the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters. The Going to the Sun Road remained open throughout the investigation, but additional warning signs were installed and ranger patrols were increased during peak visitor seasons to provide enhanced protection for travelers in grizzly habitat. The Toyota 4Runner involved in the attack was preserved as evidence and later used for research into vehicle modifications that might provide better protection from wildlife attacks. However, engineers concluded that no practical modifications could protect against the determined assault of a large grizzly bear. Bear 471's radio collar data was analyzed extensively to understand his movement patterns and territorial behavior leading up to the attack. The information revealed that he'd been ranging much more widely than typical for his age and size, possibly due to the reduced food availability caused by drought conditions. The necropsy of Bear 471 revealed that he was in excellent physical condition despite the food stress affecting the region's bear population. His aggressive behavior could not be attributed to illness, injury, or poor nutrition, making the attack even more mysterious from a scientific perspective. Dr. Chen's continued research into grizzly behavior was influenced significantly by the Riley family attack, leading to new studies on individual bear personalities and the factors that might cause some animals to lose their natural wariness of humans more readily than others. The incident became a case study in wildlife management programs throughout North America, used to train park rangers and wildlife biologists in recognizing and responding to potentially dangerous animal behavior before it escalates to fatal encounters. Sarah Riley eventually returned to nursing, but specialized in trauma care, finding purpose in helping other families cope with sudden injuries and loss. Her experience surviving the bear attack gave her unique insights into the psychological needs of trauma victims and their families. Emma Riley developed a lasting interest in wildlife biology, inspired partially by her desire to understand what had happened to her family and to contribute to preventing similar tragedies. Her academic work focused on human-wildlife conflict resolution and bear behavior research. Michael Riley struggled with anxiety and post-traumatic stress for several years after the attack, requiring extensive therapy and support to process his memories of witnessing his father's death. His recovery was gradual but ultimately successful, allowing him to reclaim his sense of security and confidence. The attack's anniversary became an annual opportunity for park officials to review safety protocols and remember the lessons learned from the tragedy. The date also marked renewed commitment to research and education aimed at preventing similar incidents. The media attention gradually faded, but the Riley family attack remained a reference point for discussions about wildlife management, park safety, and the inherent risks of recreation in wild places. The incident highlighted the complex balance between preserving natural ecosystems and protecting human visitors. The legal settlements resulting from the attack led to increased funding for wildlife monitoring and visitor safety programs in Glacier National Park. The additional resources allowed for enhanced technology and staffing to better track dangerous animals and communicate risks to the public. The scientific paper published about Bear 471's behavior became one of the most cited references in grizzly bear research, providing unprecedented documentation of an attack that challenged existing understanding of bear-human interactions. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of emergency response procedures in all national parks with dangerous wildlife populations. The review led to improved coordination between agencies and better equipment for responding to wildlife attacks. 5 years after the attack, Sarah Riley remarried a fellow trauma nurse who understood her experiences and could provide the emotional support she needed to fully heal from the tragedy. The new relationship honored James's memory while allowing her to rebuild her life. Emma graduated from college with a degree in wildlife biology and began working for the National Park Service, continuing her father's passion for wilderness protection while contributing to the safety of future park visitors through her research and education work. Michael developed into a skilled wilderness photographer, using his art to capture the beauty of places like Glacier National Park while maintaining a healthy respect for the dangerous wildlife that makes these areas truly wild. The grove of trees planted in James Riley's memory became a popular destination for visitors seeking to understand the complex relationship between humans and wildlife in America's national parks. The memorial served as a reminder that wilderness preservation requires accepting inherent risks that cannot be completely eliminated. The scientific understanding of grizzly bear behavior was permanently changed by the Riley family attack, leading to new research directions and management approaches that better account for individual animal variations and environmental stresses that might influence behavior. Park Ranger Mike Thunderhart was promoted to supervisory positions where he used his experience to train other rangers in wildlife emergency response. His calm courage during the attack became a model for how park personnel should respond to similar situations. The incident ultimately strengthened support for both wildlife conservation and visitor safety programs, demonstrating that protecting both humans and animals requires increased knowledge, resources, and commitment to understanding the complex dynamics of shared wilderness spaces. Dr. Walsh continued her wildlife photography career, but became an advocate for improved safety education and emergency response capabilities in national parks. Her documentation of the attack provided crucial evidence for understanding what had happened and preventing future tragedies. The changes implemented after the Riley attack were credited with preventing several potential incidents in subsequent years, as improved monitoring and communication systems allowed park officials to identify and address dangerous situations before they escalated to fatal encounters. The legacy of September 22, 2024 continued to influence wilderness safety protocols and wildlife management decisions more than a decade later, ensuring that Dr. James Riley's death contributed to protecting countless other families seeking to experience the wonder and majesty of America's wildest places. The story of the Riley family's encounter with Bear 471 became a permanent part of Glacier National Park's history, teaching visitors and staff alike that even the most careful preparation cannot eliminate all risks when humans choose to enter the domain of one of North America's most powerful predators. The incident report's conclusion emphasized that while the attack was unprecedented and largely unpredictable, the response had demonstrated both the dedication of park personnel and the need for continued vigilance in managing the complex relationship between human recreation and wildlife conservation in America's national parks. The memory of that September afternoon in 2024 would forever remind everyone who worked in or visited Glacier National Park that wilderness is not a playground, but a place where natural forces operate according to their own rules, demanding respect, preparation, and the acceptance that some risks cannot be eliminated regardless of human planning and technology. The Riley family's story became a testament to both the fragility of human life in wild places and the resilience of those who survive traumatic encounters with nature's most formidable creatures, serving as inspiration for improved safety measures while honoring the memory of those who paid the ultimate price for humanity's desire to experience truly wild places. The next stories: When the Ice Breaks, a polar bear horror story. The morning of July 2nd, 2025, dawned clear and deceptively calm across the tundra landscape surrounding Churchill, Manitoba. Dr. Brian Mitchell, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer from Denver, Colorado, stood outside his reinforced camping tent at 5:47 a.m., breathing in the crisp Arctic air that carried the scent of sea ice and wild grass. His wife, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old marine biologist, emerged from their shelter moments later, her auburn hair catching the early morning light as she stretched and surveyed the vast expanse of Hudson Bay, stretching endlessly before them. The couple had arrived in Churchill 3 days earlier as part of a research expedition documenting the effects of climate change on polar bear populations. Brian, whose work had been featured in National Geographic and Wildlife magazine, had spent the better part of 2 years planning this trip. His Canon EOS R5 camera, equipped with a 600mm telephoto lens, hung around his neck like a familiar weight. Sarah, meanwhile, had packed her field research equipment with the methodical precision that had earned her a PhD from the University of British Columbia and recognition as one of Canada's leading experts on Arctic marine ecosystems. Their campsite, designated as Research Station Point 7 by the Churchill Northern Studies Centre, sat approximately 2.3 kilometers northeast of the town's main settlement, positioned on a slight elevation that provided panoramic views of the surrounding tundra. The location had been specifically chosen for its proximity to known polar bear migration routes, while maintaining what authorities considered a safe distance from primary hunting grounds. A reinforced electric fence, powered by solar panels and backup batteries, surrounded their 50-square-meter camping area. Motion-activated floodlights had been installed at strategic points, and their satellite communication device maintained constant contact with the research center's emergency response team. The temperature hovered at -2 degrees Celsius, unusually warm for the season, a fact that concerned both researchers. Climate data from the previous month showed that sea ice formation had been delayed by nearly 3 weeks compared to historical averages, forcing polar bears to remain on land longer than their natural feeding cycle demanded. This disruption to their hunting patterns made the massive predators increasingly desperate and unpredictable. Dr. Marcus Wellington, the 58-year-old director of the Churchill Northern Studies Centre, had briefed the couple extensively before their departure. A grizzled veteran of Arctic research with over 30 years of experience in polar bear territory, Wellington had witnessed firsthand the changing dynamics between humans and these apex predators. His weathered face, marked by decades of exposure to harsh Arctic conditions, had been grave as he outlined the safety protocols that governed all research activities in the area. "The bears are getting bolder," Wellington had explained during their final briefing on June 29th. "Last month alone, we've had 17 confirmed sightings within 5 kilometers of town. That's nearly triple the historical average for this time of year. The delayed ice formation is driving them to explore new food sources, and unfortunately that includes investigating human camps." Sarah had taken meticulous notes during the briefing, her scientific training compelling her to document every detail. She had recorded Wellington's warnings about the increased aggression levels observed in recent polar bear encounters, noting that wildlife authorities had been forced to relocate or destroy 3 bears in the past 6 weeks due to dangerous behavior patterns. The statistics painted a troubling picture. Polar bear-human conflicts had increased by 127% over the previous 5 years, with climate change serving as the primary driving factor. Their research team consisted of 6 individuals, though they had split into 3 separate camps to maximize data collection across different geographical zones. Dr. Jennifer Park, a 29-year-old climatologist from Seoul National University, and her research assistant, Thomas Hendricks, a 24-year-old graduate student from McGill University, had established their base camp 8 kilometers to the west, near the mouth of the Churchill River. Their focus centered on measuring permafrost degradation and its impact on coastal erosion patterns. The third team, positioned 6.2 kilometers to the south, included Dr. Elena Voronova, a 41-year-old Russian zoologist specializing in Arctic fauna behavior, and Dr. James Blackfoot, a 36-year-old indigenous researcher from the University of Manitoba whose traditional knowledge of polar bear behavior had proven invaluable in previous studies. Their camp focused on tracking bear movement patterns using GPS collar data and thermal imaging technology. All 3 teams maintained radio contact through encrypted channels, with mandatory check-ins scheduled every 4 hours during daylight operations and every 2 hours during the night watch periods. The communication protocol had been established after a 2019 incident in which a research team in Nunavut had lost contact for 18 hours during a blizzard, resulting in a massive search and rescue operation that cost the Canadian government over $2.3 million. Brian had awakened before dawn, as was his habit when working in wilderness environments. The photographer's internal clock had adapted to the irregular light cycles of the Arctic summer, where darkness lasted only a few hours and the sun never fully set. He had spent the previous evening reviewing his equipment and planning the day's shooting schedule, hoping to capture images of polar bears fishing in the tidal pools that formed along Hudson Bay's rocky shoreline. His photography equipment represented nearly $45,000 worth of specialized gear designed for extreme weather conditions. In addition to his primary camera body, Brian carried 2 backup cameras, multiple lens options ranging from 24 to 70 millimeters to 800 millimeters, weather-sealed battery packs, and a drone capable of aerial photography in sub-zero temperatures. His Pelican cases, designed to withstand impact and moisture, contained memory cards with enough storage capacity for over 10,000 high-resolution images. Sarah's scientific equipment was equally impressive, valued at approximately $62,000, and including specialized instruments for measuring water temperature, salinity levels, ice thickness, and marine microorganism samples. Her waterproof tablet contained detailed maps of Hudson Bay's underwater topography, current patterns, and historical data spanning the previous 40 years. She had planned to collect water samples from 3 specific locations along the shoreline, areas where satellite imagery had detected unusual algae blooms that might indicate changing ecosystem dynamics. The couple's relationship had developed through their shared passion for environmental research. They had met 4 years earlier at a climate change symposium in Vancouver, where Brian's photography exhibit Vanishing Ice, the Arctic Silent Crisis, had been featured alongside Sarah's presentation on marine ecosystem collapse in warming oceans. Their marriage ceremony, held the previous September in the Canadian Rockies, had been officiated by Dr. Wellington, who had become both a mentor and close friend. Their camping equipment reflected their professional experience and the serious nature of their research mission. The main shelter, a 4-season mountaineering tent manufactured by North Face, could withstand wind speeds up to 120 kilometers per hour and temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius. The tent's reinforced aluminum frame and ripstop nylon fabric had been treated with waterproof coatings specifically designed for Arctic conditions. Adjacent to their main shelter stood a smaller equipment tent housing their research instruments, emergency medical supplies, and enough food for 2 weeks of independent operation. Their provisions included freeze-dried meals, energy bars, water purification tablets, and emergency rations designed for extreme weather survival. A portable stove capable of melting ice for drinking water sat alongside backup heating elements powered by rechargeable batteries. The electric fence surrounding their perimeter consisted of 7 strands of high-tensile wire carrying 7,000 volts of deterrent power, enough to stop even the largest polar bear without causing permanent injury. Motion sensors positioned at 15-meter intervals could detect approaching wildlife and automatically activate both audible alarms and emergency floodlights. The system had been tested extensively and maintained a 94% success rate in deterring polar bear approaches during the previous 2 years of operation. At 6:15 a.m., Brian began his morning equipment check, a routine he had followed religiously throughout his career. Each camera lens was examined for condensation or ice formation, battery levels were verified, and memory cards were tested for proper function. The Arctic environment posed unique challenges for electronic equipment, with rapid temperature changes capable of causing condensation inside camera bodies and extreme cold-reducing battery life by up to 60%. Sarah simultaneously conducted her own pre-research checklist, calibrating water testing instruments and reviewing the day's collection schedule. Her research protocol required samples to be collected at specific tidal intervals, with the optimal collection window occurring between 8:30 and 11 a.m., when tidal forces created the most dynamic water movement patterns. The couple's satellite communication device, an Iridium 9575 Extreme, maintained constant contact with both the Churchill Northern Studies Centre and the Canadian Coast Guard's Arctic Rescue Coordination Centre in Trenton, Ontario. Emergency protocols required position updates every 30 minutes during active research periods, with automatic distress signals triggered if no manual check-in occurred within 60 minutes of the scheduled contact time. At 6:33 a.m., Brian spotted the first wildlife of the day, a small pod of beluga whales approximately 800 meters offshore, their distinctive white forms visible against the dark water of Hudson Bay. Through his telephoto lens, he could observe their feeding behavior, noting the efficiency with which they navigated the shallow coastal waters. The whales represented one of the Arctic's conservation success stories, with populations recovering steadily after decades of protection from commercial hunting. Sarah joined her husband at the shoreline observation point, bringing her binoculars and field notebook to document the whale sighting. The marine mammal's presence indicated healthy fish populations in the immediate area, suggesting that the ecosystem maintained its basic functionality despite broader climate pressures. She recorded water temperature readings of 3.2 degrees Celsius, significantly warmer than historical averages for early July. The research station's proximity to Hudson Bay provided unparalleled access to one of the world's most important polar bear habitats. During the summer months, approximately 1,200 polar bears congregated along the bay's western shores, waiting for ice formation that would allow them to return to their primary hunting grounds. This congregation created the largest accessible population of polar bears on Earth, making Churchill a destination for researchers, photographers, and wildlife enthusiasts from around the globe. However, the delayed ice formation had created unprecedented challenges for both bears and researchers. Polar bears evolved as specialized marine hunters struggled to find adequate food sources on land. Their natural diet consisted primarily of ringed seals, obtained through hunting from sea ice platforms. Without access to these hunting grounds, bears experienced rapid weight loss and increased stress levels that manifested in more aggressive and unpredictable behavior patterns. Local indigenous knowledge, passed down through generations of Cree and Inuit hunters, provided crucial insights into polar bear behavior. Elder Thomas Beargrease, a 71-year-old traditional knowledge keeper from the Churchill First Nation, had warned research teams about subtle changes in bear movement patterns that indicated heightened aggression levels. His observations, based on 60 years of living alongside polar bears, suggested that bears were venturing farther from traditional routes and spending more time investigating human activities. At 7:02 a.m., the couple's radio crackled with the first scheduled check-in from Dr. Park's team. Jennifer's voice, slightly distorted by atmospheric interference, reported clear weather conditions and normal equipment function. Their morning had begun with temperature measurements along the riverbank, where thermal sensors detected permafrost thaw rates accelerating beyond predicted models. Water temperatures are up another 0.8 degrees from yesterday's readings, Dr. Park reported. We're seeing significant erosion along the riverbank where the permafrost has retreated. I estimate we've lost another 3 meters of shoreline since our last measurement cycle. Thomas Hendricks added supplementary observations about wildlife activity in their sector. We've got fresh bear tracks approximately 200 meters south of our position, probably from overnight movement. The tracks appear to be from a large adult, possibly male, moving northeast toward the bay. No immediate threat, but we're maintaining elevated awareness protocols. The third team, led by Dr. Voronova and Dr. Blackfoot, reported similar findings from their southern position. Elena's thermal imaging equipment had detected bear movement throughout the night, with at least 5 individuals passing within 2 kilometers of their camp. The bears appeared to be following traditional migration routes towards seasonal fishing areas, behavior that suggested normal patterns despite the environmental stresses. GPS collar data from Bear 247 shows interesting movement patterns, Dr. Blackfoot reported during his scheduled transmission. She's a mature female, approximately 400 kilograms, and she's been circling the same 3 square kilometer area for the past 48 hours. This suggests either territorial behavior or investigation of a specific food source. We're planning a closer observation mission this afternoon. Brian and Sarah's research schedule called for a systematic survey of tidal pool ecosystems along a 2-kilometer stretch of shoreline. These pools, formed by receding tides and wave action, served as crucial habitat for marine invertebrates, small fish, and the microscopic organisms that formed the base of the Arctic food web. Changes in these ecosystems often served as early indicators of broader environmental shifts. The couple began their survey at 7:45 a.m., moving methodically along the rocky shoreline while maintaining radio contact with base operations. Brian's photography focused on documenting the interaction between ice formations and marine life, capturing images that would later be analyzed for evidence of ecosystem adaptation to changing conditions. His drone, equipped with a thermal imaging camera, provided aerial perspectives that revealed thermal patterns invisible from ground level. Sarah's water sampling routine required precise timing and sterile collection techniques. Each sample was labeled with GPS coordinates, collection time, and environmental conditions before being sealed in specially designed containers that maintained temperature stability during transport. Her preliminary field tests measured pH levels, dissolved oxygen content, and visible organism density using portable analysis equipment. At 8:23 a.m., both researchers paused their work to observe a spectacular natural phenomenon. the arrival of a massive iceberg drifting south along Hudson Bay's eastern current. The ice formation, estimated at approximately 120 meters in length and 40 meters in height, represented a calving event from Arctic glaciers hundreds of kilometers to the north. Its presence in Hudson Bay during summer months indicated accelerated glacial melting, providing dramatic visual evidence of climate change impacts. Brian's photography of the iceberg required careful positioning to capture both its massive scale and its interaction with local wildlife. Seabirds, including several species of gulls and a pair of Arctic terns, had taken refuge on the ice formation's flat surfaces. The contrast between the brilliant white ice and the dark bay water created compelling compositional opportunities, while the berg's gradual melting process could be documented through time-lapse photography techniques. Sarah collected water samples from areas directly adjacent to the iceberg, hypothesizing that glacial meltwater might create localized changes in salinity and temperature that would attract specific marine organisms. Her instruments detected a notable temperature drop of 1.7 degrees Celsius within a 50-meter radius of the ice formation, along with decreased salinity levels that suggested significant freshwater input. The morning's research proceeded smoothly, with both scientists maintaining their scheduled data collection while remaining alert for wildlife encounters. Their training emphasized the importance of situational awareness in polar bear territory, requiring constant visual scanning of the surrounding area and immediate response to any signs of bear presence. Warning signs included fresh tracks, scat deposits, disturbed vegetation, and the distinctive musky odor that polar bears produced through scent glands. At 9:17 a.m., Brian noticed unusual bird behavior approximately 500 meters inland from their position. A group of Arctic ravens, typically fearless scavengers, had taken flight suddenly and were circling an area of low tundra vegetation. Ravens served as reliable indicators of predator presence, often following polar bears to scavenge from kill sites or investigating areas where bears had cached food. "Sarah, check this out," Brian called, focusing his telephoto lens on the area where the ravens maintained their aerial patrol. "Something's got them excited over there. Could be worth investigating." Sarah lowered her sampling equipment and raised her binoculars, scanning the tundra landscape for movement or anomalies. The terrain consisted of typical Arctic vegetation, low-growing willows, cotton grass, and various moss species adapted to permafrost conditions. Scattered boulders, deposited by glacial activity thousands of years ago, provided potential hiding places for wildlife. "I don't see anything obvious," Sarah replied, after several minutes of observation, "but the raven behavior is definitely unusual. They're maintaining a pretty specific flight pattern, like they're tracking something moving through that area." The couple decided to continue their shoreline research while maintaining visual contact with the raven activity. Professional protocols emphasized avoiding unnecessary risks, particularly when working in areas where polar bear encounters could escalate rapidly from observation to life-threatening situations. Their emergency procedures called for immediate retreat to the protected camp perimeter if bears were spotted within 200 meters of their position. At 9:34 a.m., the ravens' behavior changed dramatically. The birds, which had been circling at approximately 30 meters altitude, suddenly gained elevation and dispersed in multiple directions. This flight pattern typically indicated that whatever had attracted their attention was no longer stationary or had become a threat to the birds themselves. Brian adjusted his camera settings for rapid-fire photography, switching to continuous shooting mode while maintaining telephoto focus on the area of interest. Professional wildlife photographers learned to trust animal behavior as an early warning system, often capturing critical moments by responding to subtle environmental cues rather than waiting for obvious visual confirmation. Sarah reached for their radio to report the unusual wildlife activity to the Research Coordination Center. Standard protocols required immediate notification of any behavior that might indicate predator presence, allowing other teams to adjust their activities accordingly. The radio transmission would also create an official record of the observation, valuable data for later analysis of polar bear movement patterns. Churchill Base, this is Research Station Point 7, Sarah transmitted. We're observing unusual raven activity approximately 500 meters northeast of our position. Birds exhibited circling behavior for approximately 20 minutes before dispersing at 0934 hours. No visual confirmation of cause, but behavior suggests possible predator presence in Sector 7 Alpha. Dr. Wellington's voice responded immediately, his tone reflecting the gravity that any potential bear sighting carried. Roger, Station Point 7, we're updating the activity log and alerting other teams in your sector. Maintain elevated awareness and report any additional observations immediately. What's your current distance from camp perimeter? Approximately 1.2 kilometers southeast of base camp, Brian replied, consulting his GPS device. We're conducting scheduled shoreline surveys with clear sightlines to the bay. Emergency retreat route is clear, and we're maintaining radio contact. Acknowledged. Complete your current sample collection and consider returning to base camp for situation assessment. We've had 2 additional reports of unusual wildlife behavior in the past hour, including agitated caribou movement patterns 3.5 kilometers west of your position. The mention of caribou behavior changes added significance to the morning's observations. Caribou, as prey animals, possessed highly developed predator detection abilities. Their movement patterns often served as an early warning system for researchers, indicating predator presence long before human observers could detect threats. When multiple animal species exhibited stress behaviors simultaneously, experienced Arctic researchers treated the situation as a confirmed predator alert. Sarah completed her scheduled water sampling, while Brian continued documenting the shoreline with increased urgency. Both scientists understood that their research objectives remained important, but safety protocols took precedence over data collection when predator encounters seemed likely. Their training emphasized that the best scientific data came from researchers who survived to analyze their findings. At 9:52 a.m., a new sound reached their position, the distinctive huffing vocalization that polar bears used for long-distance communication. The sound, resembling a deep cough or grunt, carried clearly across the open tundra, despite originating from an estimated distance of several hundred meters. Both researchers froze immediately, their training taking over as they assessed the implications of confirmed bear presence. "That was definitely a polar bear," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she fought to control her breathing. The vocalization came from the northwest, probably the same area where we saw the raven activity. Brian slowly rotated his telephoto lens toward the sound's origin, moving with deliberate care to avoid creating sudden movements that might attract attention. Polar bears possessed exceptional eyesight and could detect motion at distances exceeding 1 kilometer. His camera's telephoto capability would allow identification and assessment without requiring closer approach. "I've got movement," Brian reported quietly, his voice tight with concentration. Large brown shape moving through the willows, approximately 400 meters northwest. Jesus, it's huge. That's definitely an adult polar bear, and it's moving in our general direction. Sarah immediately activated their emergency beacon while beginning the careful process of packing their research equipment. The beacon transmitted GPS coordinates and distress signals to both the Churchill Northern Studies Centre and the Canadian Coast Guard's Rescue Coordination Centre. Standard response time for emergency evacuation from their location was estimated at 18 to 25 minutes, depending on weather conditions and helicopter availability. Churchill Base. This is Research Station Point 7 with Priority Alpha alert. Sarah transmitted urgently. We have confirmed visual contact with an adult polar bear approximately 400 meters northwest of our position. Bear appears to be investigating our area. We are initiating emergency retreat procedures and require immediate support. Dr. Wellington's response was immediate and professional, his voice reflecting years of experience managing polar bear encounters. Roger, Station Point 7. Emergency response is activating. Helicopter ETA is 22 minutes to your position. Execute retreat protocol Charlie 7 and maintain radio contact. Do not attempt to outrun the bear. Move slowly toward your camp perimeter and be prepared to deploy deterrent devices if approach distance decreases below 100 meters. The couple began their careful retreat toward their camp, moving at a steady pace while avoiding sudden movements that might trigger the bear's chase instinct. Polar bears could reach speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour in short bursts, making flight impossible for humans on foot. Survival depended on avoiding actions that activated the bear's predatory responses while creating distance through strategic movement. Brian continued monitoring the bear's movement through his telephoto lens, providing real-time updates on the animal's position and behavior. Bear is maintaining northwest trajectory, still approximately 400 meters away. It appears to be following our scent trail from this morning's survey work. Movement is deliberate but not aggressive. No direct approach behavior observed. Sarah packed their most essential equipment while leaving non-critical items behind. Emergency protocols prioritized human safety over equipment preservation, though the scientific instruments represented months of preparation and significant financial investment. Her hands moved efficiently through the packing routine, muscle memory taking over as adrenaline sharpened her focus. At 10:06 a.m., the bear's behavior changed significantly. The massive animal, which had been following their scent trail in a seemingly casual manner, stopped and raised its head to test the air currents. Polar bears possessed olfactory capabilities approximately 7 times more sensitive than bloodhounds, allowing them to detect human scent from distances exceeding 20 kilometers under favorable wind conditions. "It's definitely got our scent," Brian reported, his voice remaining steady despite the obvious stress of the situation. "The bear just stopped and is testing the air. Wind direction is carrying our scent directly toward its position. It knows we're here." The bear's posture shifted from casual investigation to focused attention. Its massive head, easily twice the size of a grizzly bear's skull, swiveled toward their position with mechanical precision. Even at 400 meters distance, the animal's size was intimidating. Adult male polar bears could weigh up to 680 kilograms and stand over 3 meters tall on their hind legs, making them the largest land predators in North America. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she secured the final pieces of critical equipment. Their retreat had covered approximately 300 meters toward the camp perimeter, but 900 meters of open tundra still separated them from the electric fence's protection. The bear's direct attention created a psychological pressure that threatened to overwhelm rational decision-making. Churchill Base. Bear has definitely located our position and is showing increased interest, Sarah transmitted. We're approximately 900 meters from camp perimeter, requesting immediate guidance on deterrent deployment options. Maintain current retreat pace, Dr. Wellington responded. Do not deploy air horn or flare devices unless bear approaches within 100 meters. Sudden loud noises may trigger aggressive response at current distance. Emergency helicopter is airborne and tracking to your GPS position. ETA now 18 minutes. At 10:11 a.m., the polar bear made the decision that would transform a routine research day into a life-or-death struggle. The massive predator dropped to all four paws and began moving directly toward the couple's position, its gait transitioning from casual walking to purposeful pursuit. The change in behavior occurred with startling suddenness, demonstrating the unpredictable nature of polar bear encounters. "The bear is coming straight at us," Brian announced, his professional calm beginning to crack under the stress. Direct approach, moving at increased speed. Distance approximately 350 meters and closing. Sarah felt ice-cold terror flood her nervous system as millions of years of human evolution activated fight-or-flight responses. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she attempted to maintain radio contact while preparing their emergency deterrent devices. The couple carried bear spray, air horns, and emergency flares, but all deterrents required close proximity to be effective. "Churchill Base, we have direct bear approach. Repeat, direct bear approach. Distance 350 meters and closing rapidly. We are 850 meters from camp perimeter. Requesting immediate emergency intervention. All units, this is Churchill Base with priority Alpha emergency," Dr. Wellington transmitted on the general frequency. "Research Station Point 7 has confirmed polar bear attack in progress. Grid coordinates 58.7614 north, 94.1692 west. All available resources respond immediately. Helicopter rescue ETA 17 minutes. The polar bear's approach demonstrated the awesome physical capabilities that made these animals apex predators. Despite weighing over 600 kilograms, the bear moved across the tundra with surprising speed and agility. Its massive paws, equipped with claws reaching 12 centimeters in length, provided excellent traction on the uneven terrain, while generating enough force to kill a human with a single swipe. Brian made the crucial decision to continue documenting the encounter while retreating, understanding that his photographs might provide valuable scientific data about polar bear attack behavior. His camera's continuous shooting mode captured frame after frame of the approaching predator, creating a visual record of the bear's movement patterns and body language that researchers could analyze to improve future safety protocols. "Distance 250 meters, Brian reported through gritted teeth. "Bear is maintaining direct approach. No deviation in trajectory. Speed appears to be increasing." Sarah struggled to maintain composure as their situation deteriorated rapidly. The electric fence around their camp perimeter represented safety, but 850 meters of open ground might as well have been 850 kilometers with a polar bear in pursuit. Her scientific training warred with primal terror as she tried to remember emergency protocols while her body prepared for imminent death. At 10:14 a.m., disaster struck with the sudden finality that characterized Arctic emergencies. Sarah focused on radio communication while moving backward across uneven terrain, stepped into a depression hidden by tundra vegetation. Her ankle twisted violently as she fell, generating an audible crack that indicated serious injury. "Sarah's down!" Brian shouted into his radio microphone. "Ankle injury, possibly broken. She can't run. We're 200 meters from the bear and 800 meters from camp." The fall transformed their dangerous situation into an almost certainly fatal encounter. Polar bears instinctively targeted injured or struggling prey, and Sarah's immobility made her an irresistible target. Brian faced an impossible choice: abandon his wife to save himself or remain with her and accept that both would likely die. "Brian, you have to run," Sarah gasped through tears of pain and terror. "Get to the camp. Get help. Don't let us both die here." "I'm not leaving you," Brian replied with fierce determination, dropping his camera equipment and pulling Sarah to her feet. "We're getting out of this together." The polar bear, now only 150 meters away, detected the couple's distress and accelerated its approach. The massive predator's hunting instincts, refined through thousands of years of evolution, recognized the signs of injured prey. Its black nose tested the air constantly, gathering chemical information that confirmed human presence and vulnerability. Brian deployed their first deterrent device, triggering an air horn that produced a 130 decibel blast designed to startle aggressive wildlife. The sound echoed across the tundra with startling intensity, causing both humans to wince despite their preparation. The polar bear paused momentarily, its massive head tilting as it processed the unfamiliar noise. "Air horn deployed," Brian reported. Bear stopped briefly but is resuming approach. Distance approximately 125 meters. The brief pause provided crucial seconds for the couple to continue their retreat, with Brian supporting Sarah's weight as she hobbled on her injured ankle. Every step generated waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness, but the alternative to continued movement was unthinkable. Dr. Wellington's voice crackled through their radio with increasing urgency. "Station Point 7, emergency helicopter is approaching your position. Prepare for dust and noise from rotor wash. Continue retreat and deploy remaining deterrents as needed. Medical team is standing by." At 10:17 a.m., Brian could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. The aircraft, a Bell 212 configured for Arctic rescue operations, carried a crew of 4, including a pilot, co-pilot, medical technician, and wildlife management specialist equipped with tranquilizer equipment. The helicopter's arrival represented their best hope for survival, but 100 meters still separated them from the approaching polar bear. The bear's behavior indicated a committed attack rather than defensive aggression. Its ears lay flat against its massive skull, and its lips pulled back to reveal canine teeth reaching 7 centimeters in length. The animal's yellow-white fur rippled with each powerful stride as muscles designed for killing seals prepared to dispatch human prey. "Deploy bear spray," Brian commanded himself, pulling the industrial-strength deterrent from his equipment belt. The canister contained concentrated capsaicin in a pressurized delivery system capable of creating a defensive cloud extending 8 meters from the nozzle. Effective deployment required the bear to approach within 10 meters, demanding nerves of steel to allow such proximity. "Bear spray ready," Brian reported. "Distance 75 meters and closing. I can see its individual claws." Sarah's ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, making each step an exercise in controlled agony. Blood circulation to her foot was compromised, and she could feel consciousness beginning to fade as shock set in. Her scientific mind registered these symptoms with detached precision, while her survival instincts screamed warnings about imminent death. The helicopter's rotor noise increased dramatically as the aircraft approached their position. Pilot Captain Rebecca Chen, a 15-year veteran of Arctic rescue operations, positioned the aircraft for optimal intervention while maintaining safe distance from the polar bear. Her crew had responded to 17 polar bear emergencies over the previous 3 years, with mixed results depending on timing and circumstances. "This is Rescue 7 approaching Station Point 7, Captain Chen transmitted. "We have visual on 2 persons in distress and 1 large polar bear in active pursuit, preparing for emergency intervention. Clear the area for deterrent deployment." Wildlife management specialist Derek Ironcloud prepared his tranquilizer rifle, loading a dart containing enough Telazol to immobilize a 700-kilogram polar bear within 3 to 5 minutes. The drug combination provided rapid onset sedation, but required precise dosing to avoid potentially fatal overdose. Ironcloud had successfully immobilized over 200 polar bears during his 12-year career, but shooting from a moving helicopter at a running target presented extraordinary challenges. At 10:19 a.m., the polar bear reached a distance of 50 meters from the couple's position. Brian could see individual details of the massive predator, scars from territorial fights, the intelligent malevolence in its dark eyes, and the mechanical precision of its movement across the tundra. The bear showed no fear of the approaching helicopter, suggesting previous negative encounters with humans that had taught it to associate people with food opportunities. "Deploying bear spray now," Brian announced, triggering the canister when the bear closed to 15 meters. The orange-colored deterrent cloud expanded rapidly, creating a chemical barrier between predator and prey. The concentrated capsaicin, derived from the world's hottest pepper varieties, was designed to cause temporary blindness and respiratory distress without permanent injury. The polar bear charged directly through the pepper spray cloud with barely a pause, its momentum carrying it through the chemical deterrent. Some bears, particularly older individuals with previous human encounters, had developed tolerance to pepper spray through repeated exposure. The deterrent's failure left Brian and Sarah with no remaining defensive options except the emergency flares. "Bear spray ineffective," Brian reported with growing desperation. "Bear is still approaching. Distance 25 meters. Derek Ironcloud lined up his shot through the helicopter's open door, compensating for aircraft movement and wind while tracking the bear's rapid advance. The tranquilizer dart needed to penetrate the bear's thick hide and deliver its payload into muscle tissue for optimal absorption. A poorly placed shot might only anger the massive predator without achieving immobilization. "Taking the shot," Ironcloud announced, squeezing the trigger as his crosshairs aligned with the bear's shoulder region. The dart flew true, striking the polar bear in its left rear flank, with a distinctive thunk that carried over the helicopter's rotor noise. The bear spun toward the impact site, biting at the dart with massive jaws that could crush a human skull like an eggshell. Brian triggered their final deterrent device, a marine rescue flare designed to burn at 1,800 degrees Celsius while producing brilliant red illumination. The flare ignited with a whooshing sound, creating a chemical flame that bears instinctively feared. He held the burning device between himself and the approaching predator while supporting Sarah's weight with his free arm. The polar bear paused 15 meters from the couple, its massive head swaying as conflicting instincts warred within its brain. The tranquilizer dart had delivered its chemical payload, but Telazol required several minutes to achieve full effectiveness. The flare's intense heat and chemical odor triggered avoidance responses, but the bear's hunger and territorial aggression demanded continued attack. "Dart impact confirmed," Ironcloud reported. "Estimated 3 to 4 minutes for full sedation. Bear is showing confusion but remains mobile and potentially dangerous." Captain Chen maneuvered the helicopter into position for emergency extraction, bringing the aircraft to a hover 20 meters from the couple's position. The rotor wash created a dust storm that reduced visibility while generating hurricane-force winds that threatened to knock both humans to the ground. Medical technician Lisa Strongeagle prepared extraction equipment while monitoring the bear's behavior through binoculars. The polar bear, caught between chemical sedation and predatory instincts, made several false charges toward the couple before retreating in confusion. The Telazol was beginning to affect its coordination, causing the massive animal to stumble occasionally while maintaining its aggressive posture. Ironcloud prepared a second dart, in case the initial dose proved insufficient for the bear's estimated body weight. "Bear is showing sedation effects," Ironcloud reported. "Coordination appears compromised, but animal remains upright and potentially dangerous. Recommend maintaining defensive posture until full immobilization achieved." Brian's flare burned down to a stub before extinguishing, leaving him without defensive options as the polar bear resumed its advance. The massive predator moved with obvious difficulty, its powerful legs unsteady as the tranquilizer affected its nervous system. However, even a partially sedated polar bear remained capable of killing humans with ease. At 10:22 a.m., tragedy struck despite the rescue team's heroic efforts. The polar bear, driven by instincts stronger than chemical sedation, launched a final attack on the couple. Brian pushed Sarah behind him and attempted to shield her with his body as 600 kilograms of apex predator crashed into his torso with bone-crushing force. The impact drove Brian to the ground with devastating effect. The polar bear's massive claws, designed for gripping ice and tearing seal flesh, raked across his chest and abdomen while its jaws sought his throat. Brian's screams echoed across the tundra as the bear began the methodical process of killing its prey. Sarah, helpless with her injured ankle, could only watch in horror as her husband disappeared beneath the polar bear's massive bulk. The sounds of the attack would haunt her for the rest of her life. Brian's desperate cries for help, the bear's huffing vocalizations, and the wet tearing sounds as claws and teeth found their targets. "Deploying second dart," Ironcloud announced, firing another tranquilizer projectile into the bear's shoulder region. The additional telazol dose represented dangerous territory for the animal's survival, but human life took precedence over wildlife conservation concerns. Captain Chen brought the helicopter lower, using rotor wash to discourage the bear's attack while preparing for emergency medical extraction. The aircraft's downwash created a localized storm that filled the air with debris and made accurate assessment of the situation nearly impossible. Through the chaos, crew members could see the bear's dark form moving over a motionless human figure. The second tranquilizer dart achieved the desired effect within 90 seconds. The polar bear's movements became increasingly uncoordinated before the massive animal finally collapsed beside Brian's motionless form. The predator's breathing remained steady, indicating successful sedation rather than fatal overdose, but the damage to its human victim was immediately apparent. Medical technician Lisa Strongeagle rappelled from the helicopter while the aircraft maintained its hover, reaching Brian's position within 30 seconds of the bear's collapse. Her initial assessment revealed catastrophic injuries, massive lacerations across the chest and abdomen, probable internal bleeding, and a weak pulse indicating severe blood loss. Patient is unconscious with multiple traumatic injuries, Strongeagle reported through her radio headset. Massive lacerations to chest and abdomen, significant blood loss, pulse weak and thready, initiating emergency medical protocols and preparing for immediate extraction. Sarah's screams of anguish pierced the Arctic air as she crawled toward her husband's motionless form. The sight of Brian's injuries, visible even through the blood and torn clothing, confirmed her worst fears about the attack's severity. Her scientific training allowed her to recognize the clinical signs of impending death despite her emotional trauma. Strongeagle worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize Brian's condition during the critical first minutes after the attack. She applied pressure bandages to control external bleeding while establishing intravenous access for fluid replacement. Brian's blood pressure had dropped to dangerously low levels, indicating internal hemorrhaging that required immediate surgical intervention. Starting 2 large-bore IVS with lactated Ringer's solution, Strongeagle reported. Patient's blood pressure is 60/40, pulse 140 and weak. Respiratory rate 28 and shallow. We need immediate transport to surgical facilities. Derek Ironcloud monitored the sedated polar bear while the medical team worked, ensuring that the massive predator remained unconscious during the rescue operation. The bear's breathing was steady at 12 breaths per minute, indicating stable sedation without respiratory depression. Wildlife protocols required continuous monitoring until the animal could be safely relocated away from human populations. Captain Chen coordinated with Churchill Regional Hospital to prepare emergency receiving facilities while maintaining the helicopter's position. The hospital's trauma team, led by Dr. Angela Whitefeather, began preparing Operating Room 2 for emergency surgery, while blood bank technicians cross-matched Brian's blood type for massive transfusion protocols. Churchill Hospital, this is Rescue 7 with priority Alpha trauma incoming, Captain Chen transmitted. Adult male, multiple polar bear attack injuries, estimated arrival in 12 minutes. Patient has massive lacerations, possible internal bleeding, and is in shock. Surgical team should be standing by. The helicopter extraction required careful coordination to avoid further injury to Brian's compromised condition. Strong Eagle and her partner, paramedic Robert Beardy, secured Brian to a specialized stretcher designed for helicopter transport while maintaining pressure on his wounds. Sarah, despite her ankle injury, insisted on accompanying her husband during the medical flight. Patient is packaged and ready for transport, Strong Eagle reported as the medical team lifted Brian into the helicopter's cargo area. Continued fluid resuscitation en route. Vital signs remain unstable but have stopped deteriorating. The helicopter departed Research Station Point 7 at 10:28 a.m., carrying Brian Mitchell toward what would become a desperate fight for survival in Churchill Regional Hospital's Trauma Bay. Behind them, the sedated polar bear lay motionless on the tundra while wildlife management teams coordinated its relocation to prevent future human encounters. Dr. Voronova and Dr. Blackfoot, responding to emergency radio calls, reached the attack site within 40 minutes of the helicopter's departure. Their responsibility included documenting the encounter scene, collecting evidence for wildlife management analysis, and securing any research equipment left behind during the emergency evacuation. Attack site shows significant blood loss and evidence of extended struggle, Dr. Voronova reported to the Churchill Northern Studies Center. Polar bear tracks indicate the animal followed human scent trail for approximately 800 meters before initiating direct pursuit. Equipment recovery is complete and scene documentation is in progress. The sedated polar bear, designated as Bear 394 in wildlife management records, was loaded onto a specialized transport vehicle for relocation 200 kilometers north of Churchill. The animal's aggressive behavior and human attack history marked it for enhanced monitoring, though destruction was not considered necessary given the circumstances of the encounter. Brian Mitchell arrived at Churchill Regional Hospital at 10:41 a.m., 13 minutes after departing the attack site. Dr. Whitefeather and her surgical team immediately took custody of the patient, beginning the complex process of surgical repair for injuries that challenged even experienced trauma specialists. Patient presents with multiple deep lacerations across chest and abdomen, probable hepatic and splenic injuries based on mechanism of injury. Dr. Whitefeather announced to her surgical team, blood pressure remains critically low despite aggressive fluid resuscitation. We're going directly to the operating room. The surgical team's initial assessment revealed the full extent of Brian's injuries during emergency exploration. The polar bear's claws had penetrated his chest wall, causing pneumothorax and hemothorax that compromised respiratory function. Abdominal injuries included lacerations to the liver, spleen, and small intestine that required immediate repair to prevent fatal hemorrhage. We have active bleeding from hepatic lacerations and probable splenic rupture, Dr. Whitefeather reported during the operation. Beginning damage control surgery with packing and temporary closure, this patient will require multiple operations to address all injuries. Sarah Mitchell, her ankle stabilized with a walking cast, maintained a vigil in the hospital's family waiting area while her husband underwent emergency surgery. Hospital chaplain Father Michael Sinclair provided emotional support, while medical social worker Jennifer Blackhorse coordinated communication with the couple's families in Colorado. The initial surgery lasted 4 hours and 27 minutes, focusing on controlling life-threatening hemorrhage and stabilizing Brian's condition for additional procedures. Dr. Whitefeather's team successfully repaired the most critical injuries, but Brian's condition remained precarious, with significant risk of complications, including infection, organ failure, and death. Surgery was successful in controlling immediate threats to life, Dr. Whitefeather explained to Sarah during a post-operative briefing. However, your husband's injuries are extensive, and recovery will require weeks or months of intensive care. The next 72 hours will be critical in determining his long-term prognosis. Brian Mitchell was transferred to the intensive care unit at 3:18 p.m., connected to multiple monitoring devices that tracked his heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, and neurological function. His condition was listed as critical but stable, medical terminology that offered hope while acknowledging the severity of his injuries. News of the polar bear attack spread rapidly through Churchill's close-knit community, where wildlife encounters represented an ever-present danger for residents and visitors. Local media outlets picked up the story by evening, and national news services began preparing coverage of what represented the most serious polar bear attack in Manitoba in over 5 years. Dr. Wellington convened an emergency review board to analyze the circumstances surrounding the attack, seeking to identify factors that might prevent similar incidents in the future. The investigation would examine everything from weather conditions and bear behavior to communication protocols and emergency response procedures. Preliminary investigation suggests this was an unprovoked attack by a food-stressed adult male polar bear, Dr. Wellington reported to provincial wildlife authorities. The research team followed all established safety protocols, but environmental factors created conditions that increased encounter probability beyond normal parameters. The attack investigation revealed that unseasonably warm temperatures and delayed ice formation had concentrated polar bears in areas closer to human activities than historical patterns suggested. Bear 394, the attacking animal, had lost approximately 30% of its body weight compared to previous capture data, indicating severe nutritional stress that influenced its aggressive behavior. Provincial conservation officers, led by Officer Sarah Munius, began enhanced patrols around Churchill's perimeter to monitor polar bear activity and reduce encounter risks. The attack had demonstrated that existing safety protocols, while comprehensive, could not eliminate all risks associated with research activities in polar bear habitat. "We're implementing immediate changes to research approval protocols," Officer Munius announced during a community meeting held 3 days after the attack. All field research teams will now require armed conservation officer escorts when working within 10 kilometers of known polar bear concentration areas. Brian Mitchell's medical condition improved gradually during his first week in intensive care, though complications including pneumonia and surgical site infections required additional treatment. His recovery would ultimately require 3 more operations and 2 months of hospitalization before he could return to Colorado for continued rehabilitation. The psychological impact of the attack affected both Brian and Sarah Mitchell in profound ways that would influence the rest of their lives. Brian developed post-traumatic stress disorder characterized by nightmares, anxiety attacks, and an inability to work in wilderness environments. Sarah experienced survivor's guilt, complicated by depression and chronic pain from her ankle injury. "The trauma extends far beyond physical injuries," explained Dr. Patricia Redstone, the psychologist assigned to the Mitchells' care. Polar bear attacks create psychological scars that can persist for years, affecting not only the victims but their families and the broader community that witnesses such events. The Mitchell's ordeal sparked renewed debate about the ethics and safety of wildlife research in polar bear habitat. Environmental organizations argued that climate change pressures required increased research to understand ecosystem changes, while safety advocates questioned whether human life should be risked for scientific data collection. Wildlife biologist Dr. Ian Sterling, a leading polar bear expert with 35 years of Arctic research experience, provided expert analysis of the attack for the official investigation. His report emphasized the unpredictable nature of polar bear behavior, particularly during periods of environmental stress caused by climate change. Polar bears are among the most dangerous animals in North America, capable of killing humans with minimal provocation, Dr. Sterling wrote in his report. Climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of human-bear encounters by disrupting traditional behavior patterns and concentrating bears in areas where they historically avoided human contact. The financial impact of the attack extended far beyond medical costs, with Brian and Sarah Mitchell facing potential lifetime medical expenses exceeding $2.3 million. Their research equipment, valued at $107,000, was recovered undamaged, but their professional careers in field research had effectively ended due to physical and psychological limitations. Insurance investigations revealed gaps in coverage for wildlife attack victims, particularly researchers working in remote areas where emergency response capabilities were limited. The Mitchell's case prompted legislative discussions about improving insurance requirements for scientific expeditions in dangerous environments. Media coverage of the attack reached international audiences, with wildlife documentarians requesting interviews and dramatic recreations of the encounter. Brian Mitchell's photographs, taken during the bear's approach, provided unprecedented documentation of polar bear attack behavior that proved valuable for both scientific analysis and public education. The images, published in National Geographic and Wildlife Conservation magazines, showed the progression of the bear's behavior from casual investigation to committed attack. Wildlife behaviorists used the photographs to identify specific warning signs that might help future researchers recognize dangerous situations before they became life-threatening. Bear 394, the attacking animal, was successfully relocated to an area 300 kilometers north of Churchill, where GPS collar monitoring tracked its movements for the following year. The bear's behavior returned to normal patterns after relocation, suggesting that its aggression was situational rather than pathological. This case demonstrates that polar bear attacks often result from environmental pressures rather than abnormal animal behavior, explained Dr. Andrew Derrisher, a polar bear specialist from the University of Alberta. As climate change continues affecting Arctic ecosystems, we can expect increasing conflicts between bears and humans sharing the same geographical areas. The Churchill Northern Studies Centre implemented new safety protocols based on lessons learned from the Mitchell attack. Research teams were required to carry satellite communication devices with panic button capabilities, and emergency response procedures were revised to include armed wildlife management specialists on all rescue operations. Training programs for research personnel expanded to include hands-on experience with deterrent devices, wilderness first aid certification, and psychological preparation for wildlife encounters. The enhanced training protocols increased research costs, but were deemed necessary to prevent future tragedies. Community impact from the attack extended throughout Churchill, where tourism and research activities represented significant economic factors. Local businesses reported decreased bookings for wildlife viewing tours, while research institutions reconsidered fieldwork proposals that involved extended stays in polar bear habitat. The attack also prompted renewed efforts to address climate change impacts on polar bear populations. Environmental groups used the Mitchell case to advocate for stronger greenhouse gas reduction policies, arguing that preventing climate change represented the most effective long-term strategy for reducing human polar bear conflicts. 6 months after the attack, Brian Mitchell had recovered sufficiently to return to limited photography work, though he focused exclusively on controlled environments rather than wilderness expeditions. His experience motivated him to become an advocate for wildlife research safety, speaking at universities and research institutions about risk management in dangerous environments. Sarah Mitchell transitioned to laboratory-based marine biology research, using satellite data and remote sensing technology to continue her climate change studies without requiring fieldwork in polar bear habitat. Her research on Arctic marine ecosystems contributed to understanding the environmental factors that led to the attack. The couple's marriage survived the trauma, though both acknowledged permanent changes in their relationship and life priorities. They became active supporters of polar bear conservation efforts while advocating for improved safety measures for wildlife researchers. The attack changed everything about how we view our work and our lives, Sarah Mitchell explained during a research safety conference held 1 year after the incident. We learned that nature doesn't care about our scientific objectives or our good intentions. Respect for wildlife must include acceptance of the risks involved in studying these animals in their natural habitat. The final investigation report, released 18 months after the attack, identified multiple contributing factors, including climate change impacts, bear population density, and the inherent unpredictability of polar bear behavior. Recommendations focused on improved early warning systems, enhanced emergency response capabilities, and revised research protocols that prioritized human safety over data collection objectives. The Mitchell attack became a case study in wildlife research safety programs worldwide, serving as a powerful reminder of the risks inherent in studying dangerous animals in their natural environment. The incident contributed to safer research practices that reduced the likelihood of similar attacks while maintaining the scientific objectives necessary for wildlife conservation. Bear attacks in polar bear habitat remained rare, but potentially fatal encounters that required constant vigilance and respect for the awesome predatory capabilities of Earth's largest land carnivore. The Arctic environment, beautiful and scientifically valuable, continued to demand respect for natural forces that could transform routine research activities into life-threatening emergencies with shocking suddenness. As climate change continued affecting polar bear populations and human activities in the Arctic, the lessons learned from the Mitchell attack provided crucial insights for managing the complex relationship between scientific research and wildlife conservation in one of Earth's most dangerous and rapidly changing environments. The story of Brian and Sarah Mitchell's survival served as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration for researchers worldwide, demonstrating that even the most carefully planned scientific expeditions could encounter unforeseeable dangers, while human courage and professional emergency response could mean the difference between tragedy and survival in the unforgiving Arctic wilderness. The next story is Kodiak bear destroys fishing boat, kills 2 brothers in seconds, May 18, 2024. The morning of May 18, 2024, dawned with the kind of deceptive tranquility that Alaska specializes in serving to the unsuspecting. Jacob Reynolds, 34 years old, and built like the longshoreman he'd been before inheriting his father's commercial fishing operation, stood on the dock at Kodiak Harbor, watching the fog roll in from the Gulf of Alaska. The mist moved with deliberate slowness, creeping between the weathered pilings and around the hulls of the fishing fleet like ghostly fingers searching for something lost. His younger brother Anthony, 28, and still carrying the restless energy of someone who'd never quite settled into adult responsibilities, was already aboard their vessel, the Sarah Marie, named for their mother who died in a car accident when Anthony was 16. The 30-foot aluminum hull gleamed dully in the pre-dawn light. Her twin outboard motors tilted up like the wings of some mechanical seabird preparing for flight. "You sure about this spot?" Anthony called out, securing the last of their gear. His voice carried the slight rasp of someone who'd spent too many nights in Kodiak's bars, drowning memories that refused to stay buried. "Weather Service is calling for deteriorating conditions by afternoon." Jacob spat into the harbour water, a habit he'd picked up from his father, who'd learned it from his father before him. 3 generations of Reynolds men had worked these waters, and not one of them had died in his bed. It was a family tradition nobody liked to talk about. "The fish don't care about the Weather Service," he replied, stepping down into the boat with the careful grace of someone who'd been doing this since he could walk. "Besides, when has the Weather Service ever been right about anything?" The brothers had been planning this trip for months. Not a commercial run, they had crews for that, but a personal expedition to some of the more remote fishing spots their grandfather had shown Jacob years ago, before the old man's mind had started to slip and he'd begun confusing his grandsons for Japanese submariners. Spots that didn't appear on any charts, where the salmon runs were thick enough to walk on and the halibut grew to the size of dining room tables. Anthony had been struggling lately. His divorce from Michelle had been finalized 6 months ago, taking with it half his savings and most of his faith in the future. He'd been living in a studio apartment above the hardware store, surviving on instant noodles and cheap beer, showing up to work with increasingly frequent hangovers. Jacob hoped that a few days on the water might help his brother find some equilibrium, some connection to the family legacy that had sustained the Reynolds men through 4 generations of hardship and loss. The Sarah Marie was equipped with the latest electronics, GPS navigation, fish finder, marine radio, emergency beacon, but Jacob trusted his instincts more than any gadget. He'd been reading the water since he was 12 years old, learning to interpret the subtle signs that separated the living from the dead in these unforgiving seas. The way the current moved around Woody Island, the color of the water near the kelp beds, the behavior of the seabirds, all of it told a story to those who knew how to listen. They cleared the harbour at 5:30 a.m., just as the first hint of sunrise began to paint the eastern horizon in shades of amber and rose. The Pacific stretched before them like a vast grey mirror, its surface broken only by the occasional dorsal fin of a Dall's porpoise or the distant spout of a humpback whale beginning its northern migration. Jacob pushed the throttles forward, feeling the familiar surge of power as the twin engines lifted the hull onto plane. Their destination was a sheltered cove on the northwest side of Kodiak Island, accessible only by boat and known to the locals as Graveyard Bay, a name that had originated decades ago when a whaling ship had foundered on the rocks during a storm, taking 17 men to the bottom. The bay was protected from the worst of the Pacific swells by a series of rocky outcroppings, creating a natural aquarium where salmon gathered in massive schools during their spawning runs. Anthony sat in the passenger seat, watching the coastline slide past. The island's mountains rose directly from the sea, their peaks shrouded in clouds that seemed to cling to the rock faces like smoke. Dense stands of Sitka spruce covered the lower elevations, giving way to alpine meadows and bare granite at the higher altitudes. It was beautiful in the way that only truly dangerous places could be, a beauty that seemed almost calculated to lure the unwary to their destruction. "Remember when Dad used to take us out here?" Anthony said, raising his voice over the engine noise. "You get seasick every time." Jacob smiled, his hands steady on the wheel. Still do sometimes. But it's worth it when you see what we're about to see. The journey to Graveyard Bay took 90 minutes, following a route that wove between rocky islands and past hidden coves where brown bears came to feed on salmon during the summer runs. Jacob had made this trip countless times, but he never grew tired of the scenery. Each headland revealed new vistas, each bay held its own secrets. This was Alaska at its most primal, vast, indifferent, and utterly unforgiving to those who failed to respect its power. As they rounded the final headland, Graveyard Bay opened before them like a secret revealed. The water was darker here, stained with tannins from the streams that fed into the bay from the surrounding mountains. Steep cliffs rose on three sides, their faces scarred by countless seasons of freeze and thaw. At the head of the bay, a gravel beach stretched for perhaps 200 yards, backed by a dense forest of spruce and hemlock. And everywhere, in numbers that defied belief, salmon moved through the water in great silver clouds. "Jesus Christ!" Anthony breathed, forgetting his hangover as he watched thousands of fish swirling just beneath the surface. "It's like a living carpet." Jacob cut the engines and let the boat drift, feeling the ancient satisfaction that had drawn the Reynolds men to these waters for generations. The fish were so thick they could see them from the surface, their scales flashing as they moved in coordinated patterns that seemed almost choreographed. Coho salmon, mostly, with their distinctive hooked jaws and brilliant red spawning colors, mixed with the occasional king salmon that looked like a submarine moving among minnows. "This is it," Jacob said, dropping the anchor. "This is what I wanted to show you." They spent the morning fishing with the kind of success that bordered on the supernatural. Every cast brought a strike, every strike brought a fish. Anthony's depression seemed to lift with each salmon they brought aboard, his laughter echoing off the surrounding cliffs as he struggled with a particularly aggressive coho that refused to give up the fight. For a few hours, they were just brothers again, connected by the timeless ritual of man against fish. The bear appeared at 11:47 a.m. Jacob noticed it first, a dark shape moving along the tree line at the head of the bay. At first glance, it looked like a shadow, a trick of light and vegetation that resolved into something more substantial only when it stepped onto the gravel beach. Even at a distance of several hundred yards, its size was unmistakable. This was no black bear wandering down from the mountains in search of an easy meal. This was Ursus arctos middendorfi, a Kodiak brown bear, the largest terrestrial predator in North America. "Anthony," Jacob said quietly, his voice carrying a note that made his brother look up from the fish he was unhooking. "Look toward shore." The bear was massive, even by Kodiak standards. Jacob estimated its weight at close to 1,400 pounds, with a shoulder height that would put its eyes level with a man's chest when it stood on all fours. Its coat was the color of dark chocolate, rippling with muscle as it moved along the water's edge. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful, like an oversized dog exploring a beach. But Jacob had grown up on Kodiak Island. He knew better. "How far are we from shore?" Anthony asked, unconsciously lowering his voice. "Maybe 300 yards, Jacob replied, reaching slowly for the marine radio. "Far enough." The bear was feeding on the salmon that had been spawning in the shallow water at the head of the bay. Its massive paws moved with surprising delicacy as it scooped fish from the stream, tossing them onto the gravel with casual efficiency. For several minutes, both brothers watched in fascination as the bear worked its way along the shoreline, completely absorbed in its fishing. "I've never seen one that big," Anthony said. "It's like something from a museum." Jacob was thinking the same thing, but something about the bear's behavior was beginning to trouble him. Most brown bears were cautious around humans, preferring to avoid contact whenever possible, but this one seemed oblivious to their presence, or, And this was the thought that sent a chill down Jacob's spine. It simply didn't care. At 12:15 p.m. the bear stopped fishing and looked directly at their boat. The distance was too great to see its eyes, but Jacob felt the weight of its attention like a physical force. The bear stood motionless for perhaps 30 seconds, its massive head turned toward the Sarah Marie, before slowly beginning to move along the shoreline in their direction. "It's just curious," Anthony said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Right?" Jacob didn't answer. He was watching the bear's movement, noting the purposeful way it navigated the rocky shoreline without ever taking its attention off their boat. This wasn't curiosity, this was assessment. The Kodiak brown bear is the result of 12,000 years of isolation and abundant food sources. Unlike their mainland cousins, Kodiak bears have no natural predators and very little fear of anything that moves on land or sea. They are opportunistic omnivores with the intelligence of a 4-year-old child and the physical power to tear apart a small car. They have been known to swim distances of up to 6 miles in pursuit of food, and their sense of smell is 7 times more sensitive than a bloodhound's. Jacob knew all of this, just as he knew that bears were excellent swimmers and that the scent of fresh salmon blood was probably drifting from their boat like a dinner bell. "We should go," he said, reaching for the engine controls. The bear was perhaps 200 yards away now, moving with increasing purpose along the shoreline. Its massive bulk seemed to flow over the rocky terrain with an ease that defied physics. Every few steps, it would pause and look toward the boat, as if calculating distance and possibility. Jacob turned the key and heard the starter motor engage, but the engine didn't catch. He tried again, pumping the throttle, listening to the familiar whine of the starter without the satisfying roar of ignition. "Come on," he muttered, trying a 3rd time. The bear had stopped moving along the shore. Instead, it was standing at the water's edge, perhaps 150 yards away, its massive head swinging back and forth as it tested the air. Suddenly, without warning, it stepped into the water. "Jacob," Anthony said, his voice tight with fear, "start the fucking engine." The bear moved through the water with shocking grace, its massive paws propelling it forward in a powerful doggy paddle that covered distance at an alarming rate. Its head remained above the surface, eyes fixed on the boat with predatory intensity. Jacob flooded the engine and tried again. The starter motor cranked, the engine turned over, and for a moment he thought they were saved. Then the engine died with a wet cough. The bear was 75 yards away and closing fast. "The emergency beacon," Anthony said, reaching for the GPS unit. "We need to activate the emergency beacon." Jacob grabbed his brother's wrist. "There's no time. We need to be ready to defend ourselves." The bear was 50 yards away now, close enough for them to see the water streaming from its dark fur, close enough to see the intelligence in its small, dark eyes. It moved through the water like a living torpedo, its powerful strokes eating up the distance between predator and prey. Anthony grabbed the gaff hook from the deck, its steel point gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Jacob reached for the .44 Magnum he kept in the emergency kit. A gun he'd never fired at anything larger than a beer can, but had carried on every fishing trip for the past 15 years. 25 yards. The bear's breathing was audible now, great huffing exhalations that spoke of enormous lung capacity and cardiovascular endurance. Its eyes never left the boat, never showed even a moment's hesitation or doubt. This was a predator that had never known defeat, never experienced genuine fear. Jacob chambered around and raised the pistol, knowing even as he did that 6 shots from a handgun were unlikely to stop 1,400 pounds of enraged Kodiak bear. But he had to try. He had to do something. 15 yards. The bear reached the side of the boat with surprising delicacy, its massive paws gripping the aluminum hull with claws the size of railroad spikes. For a moment, it simply hung there in the water, studying the two men with what looked almost like curiosity. Water dripped from its fur, and Jacob could smell its breath. Fish and decay, and something wild that belonged to a world without rules or mercy. Then the bear pulled itself up. The Sarah Marie was a well-built boat, designed to handle the rough seas and heavy loads of commercial fishing. But it was not designed to support 1,400 pounds of muscle and bone, hauling itself over the gunwale with explosive force. The boat tilted sharply to starboard, water pouring over the rail as the bear's massive bulk shifted the center of gravity past the point of no return. Jacob fired 3 shots in rapid succession, the .44 Magnum bucking in his hands like a thing alive. He saw at least 2 of the bullets strike the bear's massive chest, dark blood mixing with the salt water that matted its fur, but the wounds only seemed to enrage the creature further. Anthony lunged with the gaff hook, driving the steel point deep into the bear's shoulder. The bear turned toward him with a roar that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself, one massive paw sweeping the gaff aside and catching Anthony across the chest with claws that opened him from sternum to spine. The boat went over. Jacob found himself in the water, the shock of the cold driving the air from his lungs in an explosive gasp. The Pacific off Kodiak Island maintains a year-round temperature of approximately 45 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill an unprotected human in less than 30 minutes, cold enough to trigger immediate hypothermia and loss of motor function. But the cold was the least of his problems. The bear was in the water beside him, its massive bulk creating waves that threatened to push him under. Anthony was floating face down 10 feet away, his life jacket keeping him on the surface, but doing nothing to stem the blood that was turning the water around him a deep crimson red. Jacob swam toward his brother, his movements clumsy in the heavy clothing and life jacket. Behind him, he could hear the bear's heavy breathing, could feel the displacement of water as the massive creature turned toward them. He reached Anthony just as the bear reached both of them. The attack was over in seconds. One moment Jacob was grabbing for his brother's life jacket, trying to turn him over, trying to see if there was any chance of saving him. The next moment, massive jaws closed around Anthony's torso with a crunch that seemed to echo off the surrounding cliffs. Jacob watched in horror as the bear dove, taking Anthony with it into the dark water of Graveyard Bay. He treaded water in the sudden silence, surrounded by the debris of their overturned boat, waiting for the bear to return for him. It never did. The Coast Guard helicopter found him 90 minutes later, hypothermic and barely conscious, but alive. They pulled him from the water using a rescue basket, his core body temperature having dropped to dangerous levels, but not quite to the point of no return. As they flew him to the hospital in Kodiak, he looked down at the bay and saw no sign of the bear, no sign of his brother, nothing but dark water and the overturned hull of the Sarah Marie washing against the rocky shore. Anthony's body was never recovered. The Coast Guard search continued for 3 days, using boats, helicopters and dive teams to comb every square mile of Graveyard Bay and the surrounding waters. They found his shredded life jacket washed up on a beach 12 miles away, along with a few scraps of clothing and a baseball cap that had belonged to their father. The bear was never found either, though fish and wildlife officials conducted an extensive search of the area. They theorized that it had been an old male, possibly injured or sick, that had become unusually aggressive due to desperation or pain. Such incidents were rare but not unknown in the extensive wilderness of Kodiak Island. Jacob spent 4 days in the hospital recovering from hypothermia and shock. When he was released, he found that the story of the bear attack had made national news. Camera crews from CNN, Fox News, and the major networks had descended on Kodiak like locusts, turning the small fishing community into a media circus. Everyone wanted to interview the sole survivor of the attack, the man who had watched his brother die in the jaws of a monster. He refused all interviews and left Kodiak Island 2 weeks later. The Sarah Marie was eventually salvaged and sold for scrap. The fishing operation that had supported 3 generations of Reynolds men was liquidated, its assets distributed among creditors and family members. Jacob took his share of the inheritance and moved to Seattle, where he found work as a marine insurance adjuster, a job that kept him near the water but never required him to set foot on a boat. The nightmares began immediately and continued for years. In them, he was always back in the water, always watching Anthony disappear beneath the surface, always hearing that final wet crunch of bone and cartilage. He tried therapy, medication, support groups for trauma survivors. Nothing helped. The bear lived in his mind now, as real and present as it had been that day in Graveyard Bay. Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychiatrist who worked with Jacob for 3 years following the attack, diagnosed him with severe PTSD complicated by survivor's guilt. "It's not uncommon," she explained during one of their sessions. "When someone survives a traumatic event that kills a loved one, they often struggle with the question of why they lived when the other person died. The mind searches for patterns, for explanations, for some way to make sense of senseless tragedy." Jacob nodded and told her what she wanted to hear, but he knew the truth. The bear hadn't killed Anthony by accident or chance. It had made a choice. Somehow, in those final moments in the water, it had looked at both brothers and selected its victim with the cold calculation of a predator that had never known defeat. The Coast Guard investigation concluded 6 months later, with a finding of accidental death caused by wildlife encounter. The report noted that both brothers had been experienced mariners familiar with the waters around Kodiak Island, but that even experienced individuals could fall victim to the unpredictable behavior of large predators. It recommended improved emergency communication equipment for small vessels and suggested that fishermen avoid areas of known bear activity during salmon spawning season. The report made no mention of Jacob's certainty that the bear had been stalking them, that its approach had been deliberate and calculated rather than opportunistic. When he tried to explain this to the investigators, they listened politely and made notes. But he could see in their eyes that they thought grief and trauma were clouding his judgment. Maybe they were right. Maybe it had been just a hungry bear following the scent of fish to its source. Maybe Anthony's death had been nothing more than bad luck and worse timing. But on nights when the wind picked up off Elliott Bay and he could smell the salt and seaweed and something wild that reminded him of that day in Graveyard Bay, Jacob knew better. The bear was still out there, still hunting, still making choices that no animal should be capable of making. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the city was finally quiet, he thought he could hear it breathing. 5 years after the attack, Jacob received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph taken by a wildlife photographer on Kodiak Island, showing a massive brown bear standing on a rocky beach. The bear was looking directly at the camera with small, dark eyes that seemed oddly familiar. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in block letters, "Graveyard Bay, June 2029. Jacob kept the photograph in his desk drawer and never told anyone about it. But sometimes, late at night, when the insurance claims and the city noise and the medication couldn't keep the memories at bay, he would take it out and study those dark eyes, looking for some hint of recognition, some acknowledgement of what had passed between them in the cold water of Graveyard Bay. The bear looked back at him with the infinite patience of a predator that had learned to wait, that understood that all prey eventually returned to the water, that death was just another kind of tide that claimed everything in its time. In the end, Jacob knew it would come for him too. The only question was when.